watching closely?
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Establishing Shot.
Sorry, I was just into the intro track. Did you make that track?
Yeah,
bro.
Well, no.
Oh,
no, so it's a I can't remember the term, but it's like a free to use. There's no licensing on it.
Okay, but you added the quotes, right?
Yeah, I added in the movie
quotes.
Yeah,
I was like, I was gonna say you should get into like cinematic lo-fi, like hip hop beats for studying, sleeping, and I don't know, whatever the rest of the.
Yeah,
there's that one playlist everyone knows about.
I should probably shout out this guy. He's let me get his name right. Holizna, Holizna.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he has a large number of like Creative Commons music that are free to use. You can kind of check him out on those sorts of sites, and then I think he has a Patreon too where you can use even more of his stuff.
Yeah, y'all should do some collabs.
Yeah, but yeah, I added in some quotes from some of my favorite directors. So yeah,
love it. Yeah. It's a vibe.
Yeah, but yeah, we're jumping in to this next series. If this is your first time joining in, the Establishing Shot is a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. And I like to start off with kind of an overview episode, because there's always, when you do these sorts of endeavors in film study, there's always so much to talk about with a director, like kind of like looking at overarching themes and like techniques, and then like just their background and how they got started is all like always super interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I love to do these overview episodes, and yeah, I'm excited to have JP Boudreaux on with me, the first three-peat guest, I believe, if I'm thinking correctly.
Probably many more to come. I'll do this anytime you ask me to. So
yeah. So
my favorite thing to talk about is anything cinema related. So
yeah, it's I'm excited. I've introduced myself obviously before, and JP before, so we'll skip the introductions, the Eli and JP I guess biographies, and but we can jump into sort of talking about our introduction to Christopher Nolan. I personally, Christopher Nolan, obviously the topic of discussion, the man of the hour, the man of really not just the hour, but the next like however many hours of podcasts we're going to do in this series. But yeah, my introduction to Nolan was, I believe, Batman Begins. I remember seeing Batman Begins when I was in high school. Is when it came out.
Eli, do you want me to make you feel old?
I think
Batman Begins was also my start, and I was 10 years old when Batman Begins came out.
Yeah, I love it. Batman he spans generations. So
amen.
2000. I don't know that I saw Batman Begins in 2005 when it was released.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been the same year, but I definitely didn't see it in theaters. I saw it at home. I don't know on what. I guess I saw it on my TV. I don't know if I rented it or got the DVD of it or what, but I definitely watched it at home. And yeah, that was
ABC
that
Family
was my
Batman only weekends or something like that.
Yeah, that was for sure my introduction. And then I remember too, I remember I didn't see Inception in theaters either, but I do remember seeing that at some point. I don't know if I saw it before or after The Dark Knight. I might have been behind on Inception, but no, well, it seems like there was still like the cultural talk when I saw it. So I might have seen it close to when it was released. But I do remember in college, when I was in college, the Dark Knight. No, I'm thinking incorrectly. The Dark Knight came out when I was still in high school, also. So I remember seeing that in theaters, and then when I was in college, I remember going to. I was working like at a summer kind of conference center campground kind of place, and both summers I worked there in college, we went to like a midnight premiere when that was still a thing. And we went to a midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises, and yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah,
there were all kinds of people dressed up, and yeah, that was a really good time. But I also remember in college I watched The Prestige for the first time with some friends in our dorm, and yeah, that was a really. I think that's the first time like that Nolan really like stood out to me, because it was mostly like, I guess, Inception a little bit, but like man, it feels like, of course you got the Batman movies, are they still like, they're very much Nolan movies, but they are still like franchise comic book movies, which I would have seen no matter who made them, sort of thing. But when I remember when I saw The Prestige, I was just like blown away by the story and the way it was structured, which we'll get into later, is like the way he structures his stories. But yeah, for a long time that was like, when it's kind of, you kind of have to pick a movie to say when people ask you what's your favorite movie.
Yeah.
And for a long time after I saw that was what I would say. I would always say The Prestige. Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't think that's the case anymore. I still absolutely love The Prestige. But I wouldn't say it's like my favorite movie anymore. But yeah, it's still one of my favorite Nolan movies. Just like, I don't know, it was just one of those kind of eye-opening, like, oh man, there's something more going on here for me. So really, like, Christopher Nolan was one of my entry points into like loving not just like movies, like as a casual moviegoer, but like really thinking about movies and digging deeper, and like the conversation around movies that you have like with friends and other people that love watching movies and just discussing film. And so Christopher Nolan like means a lot to me because of that, because when I was in college, he really kind of was one of the, I guess one of the things that like propelled me to where I am now in my love of film. So just looking back on that, I'm just really appreciative of him, and I'm excited to do this series, covering him and his films because of that. So, but yeah, what was your kind of introduction to Nolan? And lay it on me.
I just want to start off by making a very bold statement that in the cinema world, it's probably not that hot of a take, but Christopher Nolan is the greatest of all time. Okay, I'm just saying that. But I will say
a hot take.
I think, well, maybe, I don't know. I think among like the online film bros, maybe not as hot of a take, but
sure.
I do think that it, in some ways, this sounds a bit odd probably, but in some ways I feel like Christopher Nolan has always been there. Like his movies have always been there, I mean, so it's but I can't really remember necessarily my first experience. It was probably Batman related. I have a lot of trouble like remembering things that happened yesterday, so you're trying to think back over the years about which movies I saw, which movies. At this point, I have seen all of Christopher Nolan's movies except for Following, his very first film, because it's not
Okay.
on streaming anywhere, and I just never had a chance to watch it. But or at least I don't know if it's on streaming anywhere. But I want to say I feel like I saw The Dark Knight in theaters. I definitely saw The Dark Knight Rises in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
And but a lot of the other movies that which I love, I would say every single Christopher Nolan movie is, you know, at minimum like a 3.5 out of 5 to 5 out of 5 for me. I don't
Yeah.
think he's made a single quote unquote bad movie. Um,
Yeah.
or
I feel
even
the
as
same.
you know, and I don't really think there's many other directors I think of like that besides maybe Denis Villeneuve. But I haven't seen all of his movies either. But I've seen most of the really big popular ones. I think they're all great. So I think it's something really special for a director to make, as you know, as many movies as he's made at this point, which isn't a lot by some of the heavyweight standards, but is a lot. And I feel like every single one is a cultural moment. Um,
Mm.
I wish I would have seen Interstellar in theaters. I wish I could have seen. I don't remember. I don't think I did. I wish I could have seen Dunkirk in theaters. Just didn't
Mm-hmm.
get a chance to. A lot of times, like movies come out that I really want to see when I just do not have like going to the movies money. So
Yeah,
I always
sure.
end up missing out on that kind of stuff. I really
Yeah.
wanted to see Dunkirk in IMAX, and I'm really bummed that I didn't get to. But I do remember that movie. My friend in college had just gotten like a 70-inch 4K TV that he had in his room in the college ministry dormitory that we lived in, and he like went out of town and he was like, "Hey man, if you want to like use the TV to watch anything, like feel free." And I actually watched Dunkirk for the first time on that because that was the biggest screen that I could find, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I feel like Christopher Nolan's always been there in some way, and I feel like as I've gotten older, much like you, he's been a filmmaker that's been incredibly important to me figuring out my own tastes. And as someone who aspires to be a filmmaker, who, even though I've kind of transitioned to be more focused on like the documentary world, I still would like to make, maybe movies one day as well, narrative
Mm-hmm.
films. And, I think I used to say that I'd love to be able to tell a story visually like Christopher Nolan, maybe like learn how to use the camera like Akira Kurosawa and some of my other favorite directors. But I just feel like the way that he tells the story visually is just so inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because you mentioned the Prestige, because I feel like in a way, which is I feel like that's his most like Christopher Nolan-y movie until
Sure.
maybe Oppenheimer. But because everyone's saying it's like the movie he's been building up to this whole time. But I feel like if someone's never seen a Christopher Nolan movie, that's the movie that I say watch first.
Sure.
Um, because I feel like it just does a really good job of showing who he is as a storyteller, like his obsession with
Yeah.
so many things we'll get into. And also it's just a great movie, which is weird because I feel like for a lot of people, when I see like lists or I hear discourse about it, it's actually one of his like lower rated films, which is weird, strange to me because I think it's one of his best that he's ever done. Um,
That's weird. That must just be like the circles you're in. Because
yeah,
if you like on Letterboxd, it has a 4.2, which is a really good score on Letterboxd.
that is crazy. I think
You know,
before maybe because I feel like up until maybe like Interstellar, like his movies were all like quote unquote really really well received, and then Interstellar was like the first one where there was kind of a bit of a split between the critics and the audience, and
mm-hmm.
Dunkirk kind of the same, Tenet kind of the same, then Oppenheimer is kind of the next film where it's like it's pretty much universally loved by critics and audiences,
Yeah.
but I feel like maybe pre Interstellar, I think like I would look at like IMDb or something like that, and it was like his lowest rated, movie other than maybe Following, which again that was mostly out of just a lack of attention to it.
Yeah.
And then I always like I never really understood that because I think it's one of his best. I mean, I would say like outside of the Dark Knight trilogy, I mean, I'd say Interstellar, Inception, Memento, and The Prestige are all 5 out of 5 for me. You know, and then for a long time, my favorite movie of all time was The Dark Knight. It was only
Sure.
until the last few years that, you know, I had other movies like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty was my favorite movie for a long time, and then nowadays
That's
it's
one of my wife's
probably
favorites.
yeah, that movie makes me cry every time I watch it. Nowadays it's probably Everything Everywhere All at Once, but I think The Dark Knight is still one of the greatest movies ever made, superhero or otherwise, and you know, yeah, and I still don't think it's been topped. I mean, the Batman was, I would say, just as good, but I would hesitate to say
Yeah.
it's necessarily better. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of my thing. Is like
Yeah.
I feel like he's always been there. I've always loved his movies, and I just think he's just such a fascinating individual. He's a fascinating storyteller, and you know, I think
Yeah.
he's one of the he's really the only director like outside of more niche circles nowadays that I think like his name alone gets butts in seats. You know, you have like your Ari Asters, but
Mhm.
that's really just like a horror community kind of guy, or maybe David Fincher, but I feel like again, like it's just not that wide appeal. And even then, I
Yeah.
actually got to argue with my friends recently about if he was a household name or not, because outside of people who like keep up with cinema, like people probably like his movies but don't necessarily know it's him who made them. But yeah, I think he's just the only really director I can think of nowadays outside of more niche circles that his name alone gets people excited about what's happening. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I really do think he is like and we'll kind of talk about it as we kind of introduce just like the background, but yeah, he is a like get butts and seats in theaters kind of director at this point. I mean, I really like started going to the movie theater more in later in college, and especially like after I graduated. But yeah, like so I really wish I would have been seeing his movies, earlier in
Yeah, same.
theaters. But yeah, I mean, I saw Interstellar twice in theaters. And I guess spoiler alert is my favorite Nolan at this point. We'll see if that changes and it's
During
funny
the
because
series.
like it's funny because like Interstellar is my favorite, but I think Dunkirk is like a perfect movie. It's like one of those movies, like if you were to say like what is a perfect movie, obviously no movies are perfect, and I don't think any director would say his movie is perfect. But I think Dunkirk is like just like everything about it is just so precise and perfectly constructed that I would say like it's just a perfect movie. But and I don't think Interstellar is a perfect movie. I think it has flaws, but it's my favorite. I like it more, I guess. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, there's definitely a difference, like, between technically perfect versus the one that impacts you the
yes,
most. I mean, it's a
yeah,
very emotional movie. I mean, I'll be honest, I have not seen it in probably too long. I really need to watch it again. But
yeah.
yeah,
You can
I
watch it
mean,
along
Matthew
with the series.
McConaughey's before I do. Yeah, exactly. So it's perfect for.
Yeah, yeah. And I did. By the way, I did look following. For both you and the listeners, following is actually on Tubi right now. So
Oh,
Tubi is a free, like a free streaming thing with ads. So
nice. I'll have to check
you'll
that out.
have ads, but you can stream it for free on Tubi. So, and get this is just another plug. It's been a recommendation of mine in the past, but get a library card. Because I almost guarantee that your local library has a copy of Following, or your branch probably has it somewhere, or you can get an interlibrary loan even if it doesn't. So yeah, that's a big recommendation of mine is utilize your library, but also like justwatch.com is a frequent site I visit. Justwatch.com, you can just search the movie you want to watch and see where it's streaming, or even like where you can rent it and how
Right.
much.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's jump in to Nolan. You know, we were talking about this sort of, and yeah, he really is like one of the few directors that can walk into a studio with a completely original screenplay, lay it down, and walk out with a $200+ million budget, like no questions asked, sort of like. He just like, I can't imagine a screenplay he would walk in with and not get that at this point.
I mean, again, like you think about.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I was gonna say with Oppenheimer. I mean, it's a rated R 3-hour biopic, and I mean, I think it was like $100 million, which is still a pretty sizable budget for a movie like that. Like, I'm like,
Right.
no one else is gonna get $100 million to make a 3-hour rated R biopic about a nuclear physicist. That's just
Right.
you know.
Yeah, and yeah, it says 100 million on the old Google machine. But yeah, he really is, and I think he's defined like the millennial, like we were kind of talking about. He's defined the millennial like generation of Hollywood. Like even more so, like other, like when you start getting into film circles, like you hear a lot of Soderbergh and Fincher, Aronofsky, like Catherine Bigelow, even like the Wachowskis, who have had their small share of blockbusters. You know,
Do you mean
more than
what do you mean when you say millennial Hollywood?
like millennial Hollywood, that being like the like the millennial generation, like the movies that the millennial generation like calls their own, sort of thing. That were like that were like coming out as millennials were like growing up. So that
for sure.
That is so, and that's me. I'm at the tail end of the millennial generation, and like these movies were like I was saying, like he was pumping these out as I was like in middle school and high school and college. Like he was pumping these movies out that are like household name movies now.
I didn't know if you meant by like, you know, movies made by millennial directors, and I was like, I don't think any of these guys are really. I think they're all Gen Xers. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, no, definitely the when their movies are coming out, for sure.
Right. No, yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
But yeah, he's defined like, you know, those like millennials, like people born in the 80s and like early 90s, like that's Christopher Nolan is like the director, the like blockbuster director for, you know, our generation. And even more so than those very prestigious names, I think. Even more like than, you know, we just did the series on Wes Anderson. He's sort of a similar, coming up in a similar like generation, like of millennials. Are his movies are millennial movies, and that millennials are the ones in theaters watching them. Which, you know, Wes has become very well known too, but not to the same degree as
it's
Nolan,
much more of a niche. You know, the joke being, I think I said this during one of the Wes Anderson episodes, he's your barista's favorite director, Wes Anderson. You know, I think it's a much more niche crowd. I mean, I appreciate Wes Anderson as much as the next guy, but yeah, I think Nolan is just obviously on a different level, but also like, I mean, he's not telling the same kind of story as Wes Anderson is. You know, I mean, everybody's got their own lane. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, like he has become a franchise unto his own, and I think I can't remember what book I was reading that was kind of putting it that way, but like kind of like George Lucas, James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, Christopher Nolan. Like you can, I mean, you can honestly put his name in those. Those are all four of those guys. You hear their name, you know, like the sort of experience you're going to have, and you want to go experience it. You want to go experience a George Lucas movie. You want to go experience a Spielberg movie, and that's the movie is a Spielberg movie. Before it's anything else, it's a Spielberg movie, and it's the same with Nolan at this point. You know, he only has 11, 12 films now, 12, and 12 features now, and really like he is like, it's a Nolan movie. It's a Christopher Nolan movie. That's the big name on the poster, like over the actor at this
It's
point.
called quality over quantity, babes. You know?
But yeah, and I think he's one of those guys that just loves it so much that I'm sure he's just going to keep on rolling like guys like Spielberg have. And honestly, I hope he does keep making movies at the same like frequency that Spielberg does. Even, you know, as he gets older, you know, you think of guys like James Cameron and George Lucas, they've kind of like, they slowed way down, you know, but part of that is James Cameron's like obsessiveness with the technology, I guess. But
yeah, and I think well, also I think a lot of those guys have done a lot of producing as well. Like right. So while they may have been slowing down, while they may have been slowing down directing films, they've still been very active, like behind the scenes. I mean, Spielberg's been attached to a ton of stuff. I would say, like, I also hope that he continues making movies for a long time, but I would say with the caveat of I hope he still keeps that quantity. I mean, I said it as a joke, but quality over quantity factor, because I think a lot of people who do keep up with cinema would say that, you know, Spielberg, Cameron, a lot of these older directors that were coming up in the 70s and 80s, a lot of them, or even before that, like their movies have kind of dwindled in some ways. I mean, I'll be honest, like the only recent Spielberg movie I was 100% excited for was West Side Story, just because I grew up with a musical family and I love the original film. I like the musical, so I went and saw that in theaters because I wanted to go support the movie. And I thought it was actually a really good modernized take on the musical. But and I saw Ready Player One in theaters and I thought it was okay. But you know, it's just like I don't want to say he's lost the spark per se. I think it's a bit harsh, but there's definitely something very magical about, you know, 80s, 90s, early 2000s Spielberg that I don't really feel anymore. And so that's one thing I would say. Like, I don't necessarily worry about with Christopher Nolan, because I think he's proven that he's only gonna make a movie that he feels very passionate about. You know, whereas I think some of these other directors might have kind of signed up to make movies that they didn't necessarily love, but, you know, contractually obligated, or they just needed to, you know, get a paycheck, or I don't know, you know. But I feel like Nolan's kind of solidified himself that if you look at every movie he's done, like it's always been a movie that he's like 100% thrown himself into. And I think it also helps that, you know, and I'm sure we'll get into this, that he does. I mean, almost every movie he's made, I think he wrote the script as well. So he like lives and breathes this story while he's in the process of making it, you know?
Right.
And so,
he's definitely had a part. He hasn't like written whole scripts for everything, but he's had a part for sure in the writing process. But yeah, he, you know, I did want to say, like, as far as Spielberg goes, like, honestly, like for me, West Side Story and The Fabelmans are both like.
I still have not seen Fabelmans. I really wanted to, but I haven't.
They're both some of my favorite Spielberg movies. Like, I wouldn't say like necessarily like top 5, but he's made a lot of movies. So even like movies that are kind of like top 10 are like really good movies, and I would put both of those in the top 10 Spielberg at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Jaws, the Indiana Jones films,
but yeah.
I think Spielberg's made too many like phenomenal movies that, you know, just from at bats, it's like, I mean, you know, you got Jaws, you got the Indiana Jones films.
Fabelmans is fantastic. Like, you should definitely see it.
I'll get around to it. It was on my list.
It helps that it's very personal. It's you can tell like he put a lot into that movie personally, which comes out, I think. But you know, getting back to Nolan, like he really is like, he's kind of like a duality of a man in a lot of different ways. Like he's American and British, not just because his parents, his mom is an American and his dad is British, but he has dual citizenship because the laws changed where he didn't have to choose before he
Mm-hmm.
would have had to choose. So he
Mm-hmm.
has a dual citizenship. He he's like a director sort of split between the digital age and tradition. Like if you think about when he was coming up, obviously like he came up with a lot of analog stuff, born in 1970, through a lot of his childhood, it's all analog, but the technology is progressing. And then by the time he's coming out with, he's kind of coming out of college and putting his first movies out, like you have the explosion of the internet. And so like his movies start coming out in like the digital age of the 2000s and up to now. And just like, I mean, even like the year following came out, or no, the year I think Memento was released, either Memento or Insomnia was like the year that like Google launched. I think it was Memento.
Memento is 2000. I think Insomnia is 2002.
Yeah, so it's one of those two. Like Google launches alongside like his
so
first
crazy
hits.
To think about that timeline.
Yeah, and like Wikipedia's like starting up around that time. It just like it's just like, but yet like he's kind of like split between two worlds in that way, because he's starting his career off with this explosion of the digital age, but like he's still like very much like a traditionalist in many ways. He like, and he's like, you even think about like his kind of like career in movies, like he's pushing things forward with like his insistence on like that IMAX huge cinematic experience is like really like when he started pushing that, it was a very forward looking thing.
Right.
But at the same time, like he's like, he wants to shoot on celluloid, like he wants practical effects over digital effects. He wants people to go see his movies in the theaters, not watch them at home. Like, so like he's just like he's very much like the definition of like a duality of a man, like in so many different ways. He even like, the internet is, like I said, rising as his career is starting, but like Nolan does not have an email address and he does not carry a cell phone. You can't get in touch with Nolan on a cell phone. You have to go through his assistant. And like if he's gonna talk with you, he's gonna say, we'll meet here at this time and talk with you, which is just like so unusual.
Sends a telegram, Morse code.
Sends there's that movie Ghost Dog with Forrest Whitaker where he only sends messages through his carrier pigeons. Yeah, really great movie.
I would not be surprised if honestly, part of me is like, I just want him to lean into the joke a little bit more. Like imagine, 10 years from now, whenever, he's got a movie coming out, the actors are all doing, press for it, and they're like, yeah, really weird thing. He sent a carrier pigeon to my house with a note saying, meet here at 5:00. And to be honest, I didn't even know it was Chris. I was just so scared that I decided I needed to show up. Yeah, I could totally see something like that happening. That would be so hilarious.
Yeah, and it's funny because like there's, I'm obviously without like it has the humor, but without the pigeon, there's like the story. He's very much known for like punctuality and but also like and discipline, but also like his secrecy. So like there's Michael Caine tells a story about how for Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan showed up at his front door with the script, and Michael Caine, I guess, didn't know what he looked like. He was expecting a script, so he thought it was like some intern or assistant bringing him the script.
Messenger.
And he's like, hey, I'm Christopher Nolan, and he's like, oh, and he's like, I want you to read my script. Like, oh yeah, I'll read it and get back to you. And Nolan says, no, can you read it right now? and like he basically like invites himself in, and Michael Caine says he just like sat in his living room and drank tea while I read the script, and then when he left, he took the script with him. Like,
Or I think John David Washington.
Story, but yeah,
I think I remember John David Washington saying that when it was either him or Robert Pattinson said that when they got when they were looking at the script for Tenet, like they got locked in a room. I think it was John David Washington. He said he got locked in the room for like 3 hours, and he because he kept reading it and then flipping to the previous page and then flipping back trying to like figure it out. But they locked him in a room until he was finished reading. So I mean, yeah, it's I mean, and I get it. I feel like that's one of the things that makes a Nolan movie so special is that because of his name recognition, he's able to like really bully the studios into marketing his films properly. Because there's nothing worse than the trailer that reveals too much, except for maybe the trailer that reveals like way too little. Like I definitely think that can be a problem as well.
Sure.
But I like for instance, like a lot of movies nowadays, you'll have the teaser for the teaser, and then you'll have the teaser trailer, and then you'll have the teaser that the trailer is about to drop, and then you'll have the trailer, then you'll probably have like 2 or 3 trailers, and then the final trailer is like the big like I remember like the most recent Fast and Furious movie, Fast X. I think the final trailer was like 4 minutes long, shows the whole movie. And what really bothers me is when I'll if I see a movie says final trailer, or if I see like a video, like I'll avoid it if it's a movie I care about. And what I hate is like it might still be a few months before the movie comes out, and I don't want to watch that trailer. And then I go to the movies, and that's the trailer they play before the movie. And I'm just like, oh, great, cool. Like I remember Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which is one of the most disappointing movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Such a letdown. But I was really excited with the talent in front of the camera, behind the camera, with a guy who comes from more of like a horror background. I was expecting something a little scarier, but I remember the final trailer for that movie, I kid you not, 95% of the movie was in the trailer. There was one plot point not in the trailer, and it was the stupidest plot twist in the movie that the little girl was not the daughter of the guy's daughter, but actually a clone of his daughter mixed with some dinosaur DNA, or at least very heavily implied. And that was the only thing not in the final trailer. And oh my gosh, it aggravated me so much. So I think that's one of the things that makes Christopher Nolan so special that people get excited for, is because he fights for that secrecy, and people take it very seriously. And I feel like that's like, like not only are you going to be in for an experience, but you're going to be in for a surprise as well. Yeah. Even with Oppenheimer, had a lot of marketing, but I feel like it didn't really give anything. I mean, obviously it's different because it's a biopic; it's actual real history. But like a lot of the best moments from the movie, like I didn't even know we were going to be in the movie, which is really special.
Yeah, and it's funny. He in an interview I was listening to, he talked about how like proud he is of like what they come up with for his trailers, and he was almost like just like, I don't know, he was just like so proud because, and he even talked about how like sometimes it's like harder to make a trailer than it is like to like edit down a trailer than it is to like make the movie itself, just because like he said, what you're trying to do with the trailer is just so hard, like to edit down, like and come across a bit. But yeah, it probably helps that he has his own production company that like works with the distributor. Like most of his movies are distributed by Warner Brothers, but ever since like I want to say really early on, like maybe since Insomnia even, they started him and his wife Emma Thomas started their own production company, which is Syncopy.
And they've also helped produce Syncopy, a lot of, like,
I guess
with through that they've also helped produce a lot of really other great movies as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really like it's funny, like mentioning like his production company, like you just think about one of the reasons I think his movies work so well for a wide audience is just like they're very like accessible as far as like blockbuster qualities, but they're also like they bring a lot of intrigue and like household conversation and like conversation among like they're very intriguing movies. And like you just think about like the logo for Syncope, which is like a maze, like and you just think about like you really like his movies. Just think about his movies like a maze. Like they're really easy to get into, but they're kind of hard to exit. Like you kind of get stuck with them for a while after you watch them. And I think that is probably on purpose that his logo for his production company is that. But yeah, I'm, you know, he is fascinated with that sort of thing, like mirroring and inversion and stuff like that, stuff that's very intriguing and draws you in. I think probably the most, just like to kind of in this section, like the thing that stood out to one of the things that stood out to me was, you know, people that love his films really love his films, and they'll watch them multiple times, become obsessed with them. And there was a quote in this book that I wanted to read. He's kind of talking about how like people online will be like obsessed with Obsession and Memento, and people in interviews would like ask him about that. And this is the quote. He said, quote, "They're asking me to comment on that as if I thought it were weird or something." And I'm like, well, I was obsessed with it for years, genuinely obsessed with it. So it doesn't strike me as weird. We put a lot into the films. I had a lunch with a producer a few years ago, a very successful producer, not somebody I've worked with. And he was curious about my process. At some point I said, every film I do, I have to believe that I'm making the best film that's ever made. He was absolutely shocked by this. It just never occurred to him that someone would think like that. And that to me was truly shocking, because films are really hard to make. I'm not going to say it's the hardest job in the world. I've never tried coal mining, but they are all consuming. Your family life, everything goes into it for a couple of years. So it had never occurred to me that there were people doing it who weren't trying to make the best film that ever was. Why would you otherwise? Even if it's not going to be the best film that's ever made, you have to believe that it could be. You pour yourself into it. And when it affects someone that way, that is a huge thrill for me. Huge thrill. I feel like I have managed to wrap them up in it in the way that I try to wrap myself up. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a great quote to kind of summarize both like Nolan and his films and his viewers with his films. Like he's been obsessed with it for years. And because of that, like, it draws people in and they become obsessed with his movies. I mean, just think about the cultural conversation around Inception when that movie came out was just, it went on for years, really, like that conversation. Yeah, I just think because of that, like his movies will, you know, stand the test of time. And it all like, in a sense, boils down to like that obsession that he has with his films and the subject and the story and everything. But yeah, man, I guess we can hit some like biographical stuff before we start talking about. I guess just to break down, like we'll kind of talk about some biographical stuff here in a minute, and then we'll get into like more like his filmmaking and technique and themes and stuff like that. So just going through some of his childhood stuff. You know, he was born in London, Westminster, London. Like I said, his mom was from Chicago area. His dad was from Britain. His mom was a flight attendant, actually. She became an English teacher later, but yeah, she was a flight attendant, and then his dad was actually a creative director for a London-based advertising company. And so he actually worked with some filmmakers. He worked with Alan Parker and Hugh Hudson, a few others, and even like he did some work for Ridley Scott's group. I don't know if he like worked really closely with Ridley Scott, but he did do some work for Ridley Scott. And so, and yeah, he's Nolan is like the middle brother of three sons, his older brother Matthew, and then more people probably know his younger brother, Jonathan Nolan, who he's done a lot of collaboration with in his writing for
Isn't
for
it?
his movies.
Don't they say that like Jonathan was raised like more in America, so he has like an American accent, and then Christopher has the British accent, which is kind of like really funny.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah, no, power duo
weird.
there.
I don't know why that is, because it seems like they both were like living. I don't think there was often where they were like separated. So I guess it's just kind of one of those things, one of those weird
Jonathan
things
just
that
kept
comes from
practicing in
that.
front of the mirror.
Yeah, yeah. So Christopher has the British accent, and Jonathan has the American accent, which they for his like family and friends they call him Jonah. So whenever Nolan, you hear Nolan talked about it, he says he'll say Jonah, and that's Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it really like early on in Nolan's childhood, he had film was like a big thing for him. I want to say he was like 7, and he saw this movie by Alan Parker, who his dad worked with, called Bugsy Malone. It's like I don't know really much about the movie. I know there's like kids, and it's musical in a sense, and they're like gangsters or something. It's sounds like an interesting movie. But yeah, his dad he saw the movie with his parents and loved it, and then his dad was like, "Oh yeah, I've worked with that guy. Like I know him, the guy that made it." And he actually took him to Pinewood Studios, where the movie was made, and Nolan remembers like seeing the pedal cars that were in the movie like at the studio when they did the little tour. And that was an early memory for him. And then really like when the next year they spent a lot of time in his early years trying to figure out where they wanted to live, London or Chicago. And they lived in Chicago for a while, and he saw Star Wars in '77 when it released in theaters with his parents.
Man,
And that
if I had a time
he
machine.
points back to that as he points back to that as like one of the big things, like for him, just seeing like that on screen and just obsessing over it, as I'm sure many kids did back then.
That's know he's a huge
Um,
fan of 2001: A Space Odyssey as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, like, so he sees that, and he loves it. He's obsessing over it. And then, like, a few weeks later, his dad actually takes him to see, I guess him and his brothers, they did a re-release of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that was the first time, that was the movie that made it click for him. Like, movies are, I can't remember exactly how he puts it, but like the way it clicked for him was like, that's something I want to do. Like I want to make movies because they can do something. And he talks about like he didn't necessarily fully grasp like everything that was going on in 2001 at that age, but the visuals of it were captivating to him. And he actually, like, even at that young age, he had this like magazine that had an article about like how they made a lot of the stuff in like 2001 or Star Wars or something. Like, so from the get-go, when he was like a kid enjoying these movies, like he was even more so than he was interested in like what the movie was saying or whatever. He was interested in how did they make it. And so which is really incredible for a kid to have like that insight of, I don't want to just like watch the movie, I want to know how they made it.
Props to little baby Chris Nolan, because I'm 27 and still don't understand everything that happened in the movie. So much so that I've actually never been able to sit through the entirety of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I have tried multiple times, and it just gets to a point where I'm just like, my brain is mush right now. What is this movie?
Yeah.
Another hot take for you: Stanley Kubrick, extremely overrated. But we're not talking about Kubrick, so
yeah. Yeah, I think I don't think I think Nolan would take issue with you on that one. Uh,
Probably. That's okay.
but yeah, so and really like I rewatched 2001 earlier this year, and like the first time I saw it, I just didn't get it, and when I saw it this time, I was just like entranced by it. And so I kind of when I was reading that, I was like, I kind of understand where he's coming from, like,
Mm.
and he even said there was a quote where he said like he thinks he probably understood more about 2001 then than he does now, because kids just have a sense of, there's a simplicity to the way like kids think about things like that,
Right.
where like they're interested in it, but they're not gonna like overthink it. They're like, they just experience it and like are able to experience it in a fresh, like, innocent way. And he so I thought that was a cool insight. Like, man, I really like understood it probably then even more than now. But yeah, he did do like boarding school too. So his dad, I think it was when he was 11ish, 10 or 11, his dad was like, hey, I really want my sons to go to boarding school. And so they, like he did when he was a kid. So off to boarding school he went, very structured. And it was one of those things where like Nolan, I guess just because of who he is, like thrived there. And he kind of talks about like, he knew like some kids hated it, but he really like thrived in the environment, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he like really like, there was some formative stuff even like in his school days in I think it's Haileybury and Imperial Service College boarding school, or really even Barrow. So he was in Barrow Hills, and then this other one that I just said, two different boarding schools growing up there. And yeah, I know he talks about reading, like reading books and comics and listening to like stuff on his Walkman, after lights out. Probably like he wasn't supposed to, but he did. Yeah, I even think he, on his Walkman that he would listen to after lights out, would
Mm-hmm.
be like listening to like scores, like movie scores, I guess, that he got on tape. So yeah, I mean,
He's just like me.
yeah. But I think one of the things that like stood out during his kind of days there, in boarding school, one of his housemasters actually like let him and some others come to his house and watch, basically a pirated VHS of Blade Runner,
Mm-hmm.
um, at his like house, I guess, like in 30-minute increments. So like over like a course of, I guess, like a few visits, they watched Blade Runner. And yeah, he loved Blade Runner. Blade Runner's like, I guess, was one of his favorite movies, it seems like, growing up. And yeah, he actually talks about later on he saw Alien, and he kind of picked up, because he loved Blade Runner so much, like he kind of picked up on the similarities, not in like story or production or anything like that, but in like the mood and like some like like really like background stuff that was similar, and didn't know at the time that it was both Ridley Scott, and
Mm-hmm.
later like found out, and that was like another like clicking moment for him, like, oh, like the directors like have like this connective mood between their films.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like kind of when he first was like, I think I want to do that. I want to be a director that like is the connective tissue and mood between films, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Which is really cool.
I just rewatched Alien and Aliens the other day, and yeah, definitely, you could kind of see the beginnings of Ridley Scott as a filmmaker.
Mhm.
A lot of really long takes and things like that, which Blade Runner kind of has, and
Mhm.
definitely really good at setting the mood for sure. So
Yeah,
I agree with that.
yeah. And it's yeah, it was just like, like I said, fascinated with that, like just like how movies were made, and becoming, I guess, obsessed with like that connective tissue between movies sort of thing. Um, and even like, so yeah, you kind of have to jump back and forth with him, because like this was like time in London in boarding school, but he also like spent a lot of holidays, all of his holidays almost in the Chicago area. And he talks about like the differences in the spaces there. Like London is very like cramped, and everything's like old, obviously. And then he's going to like these wide open suburban Chicago, like he's playing in the woods. And like his dad actually, I think when he was 8, his dad gave him a Super 8 camera to play with. So he was shooting these like 2.5 minute silent little movies, and doing like stop motion animation with them. And I think it was like one of his early shorts he called like Space Wars, which obviously I think I want to say like that Jonathan Nolan might have said he has it somewhere. But it's one of those things that's, it's never been seen and might not ever be. But yeah, so he's,
shout out to dads with cameras.
That's where he like saw. Yes. That's where he saw like Star Wars on a holiday in Chicago. And that's where he saw like, a lot of early Spielberg there in Chicago in the summers. So yeah, that was a really important time for him too. And then like he even talks about like back when he's later in his boarding school days, him and Jonathan would like stay between terms and go to the movies a lot. And he talks about like seeing movies like Manhunter and Blue Velvet and Full Metal Jacket, Akira, just like, I guess like just really growing his cinema experience, which is probably why to this day like he's very adamant about like going to see movies in the theater, just because of how much it meant to him. And yeah, I get it. But yeah, he goes to college eventually. He went to University College of London. He studied English literature, kind of to, he knew he wanted to make film, but he wanted to expand his thinking on stories and creating stories. So English literature it was. And yeah, there, him and some others, and including his future wife, Emma Thomas, instituted what is it called? The University College of London Film and Television Society. So yeah, they kind of instituted a new little club there. And really like, so it kind of started when he, from what I've read, he kind of happened upon this basement that had a bunch of like old filmmaking equipment in it. It is the basement of the Bloomsbury Theater, which was owned and operated by the college there. And so like in the basement, he found this like room that had like a 16 millimeter camera and tripods and dolly tracks, some celluloid film, and it even had like a little Steenbeck editing machine, which I looked up. Have you ever seen one of those?
I have not.
A Steenbeck editing machine. I'll
look it up right now.
When you get a chance, yeah, look it up. And I'll keep talking, because it's really like cool looking, and like very like, when you look at it, it's like the definition of like analog editing machine. But yeah, so he like found all this stuff and started this like film society. Wow, yeah. And they talked about like method and meaning in films, and they even were able to like get screenings of 35 millimeter new releases. He talks about showing Blade Runner in the theater upstairs, and even Wayne's World when it came out on 35 millimeter film. And then he taught himself to edit on that Steenbeck, editing machine. But yeah, if you're listening and you're like, what in the world is he talking about? Just just Google Steenbeck editing, and just look at it. It has, so basically, like, you have these 3 different like reel sets, and one of them is for the film, and then there's 2 like sound ones, so you can kind of have a score and music going, and then like some sound effects and stuff going on the other sound reel. And basically, like, you're kind of running, it runs at a certain like frame per second, and there's a monitor so you can see it and hear it as it's going through. And then like you can stop it and like make your cuts and your edits and stuff like that, all right there on the machine. It's really cool looking. Like, I looked up a YouTube video of a guy using one, and that was really, I don't know, it was really interesting. And but yeah, he taught himself how to edit, and really, like, I guess, you know, growing up making those Super 8 films and then having all this film equipment, you know, now in college, you know, he started working on short films, you know, shooting on weekends, you know, editing with this editing machine. And yeah, like he really like grew in his craft in that way. You know, he talks about, you know, and we'll talk about it on the next episode with following, but he spent a lot of time, a lot of weekends doing these shoots where they would like get like 5 to 10 minutes of the movie shot, and that was it for that weekend. And, you know, go back to the job, you know, the day job, and then the next weekend shoot the next like 5 to 10 minutes of the movie. They were doing that with like these little shorts. And yeah, it's really fun. It's really incredible. There's only 2 shorts you can really see of his, from those early, like, before following days. So obviously, like, no one has access, I guess, except for family, to those things he made on that Super 8. But then there's another one called
Might
Larceny.
be for the best. Who knows?
Yeah, probably. Larceny was like it was basically like, a lot of people say it's like the predecessor to Following. But that is, it's kind of a lost film. Nobody in public has seen it. It's kind of like, I'm sure somebody has copies of it somewhere. But and it showed like at a film festival. But that was the only time it was shown, sort of thing. And so nobody's seen Larceny really. And it might be one of those things where Nolan's like, well, it was like a predecessor to Following, and I just don't want it out there, sort of thing. So, but yeah, the other 2 you can go watch. One of them is called Tarantella. It's like this weird, almost like David Lynchian short, like 2.5, 3 minute short, of like a dream, almost like a dream sequence of this guy. It's really weird, and it's that the only 2 people in it, I think, are Nolan and Jonathan, or Chris and Jonathan. But and then there's another one called Doodlebug, which is like this one. Yeah, it also kind of feels like Lynchian in its vibes. You know, he's like, you can go watch both of these on YouTube, I'm pretty sure. But it's like this dude, like, that's obviously paranoid and is trying to kill this bug or rodent or something with a shoe, and then like it's him, like it's a tiny him. And yeah, it's just kind of strange and weird. But you can see in those, like, the sort of craft he was like developing to be able to make a movie like Following.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did apply for film school. He tried to get into the National Film and Television School at the Royal College of Art, which was Ridley Scott's alma mater, but he didn't get in. And so he got a job working for an industrial film company as a cameraman. And he was mostly like shooting these like functional training videos for like CEOs of companies and stuff. And so, like, even that, like, he talks about every time you pick up a camera, you're growing in your craft. So he saw that just as an opportunity for learning. Like, he was having to work with like like bad lighting and stuff like that, and so he was learning how to like make do with what he had, and he saw that as like, I'm growing in my craft of using the camera, which you've got to love that attitude, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
uh,
A
yeah,
lot of
and then
truth to
like
that.
really like the finishing up like his early like filmmaking before, we'll talk more about following next week. I don't really want to get in much into it, but he did have a first attempt at a feature called Larry Mahoney, which is another thing that is like never seen footage sort of thing. And apparently it was about a student posing as other people. Who knows what that movie was?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then like shortly after that, um, he kind of has these two ideas that kind of merge into making Following. And like I was saying, they were shooting Following. He was working for that industrial film company, shooting training videos during the week, and then on weekends, him and Emma Thomas and some of their other friends were going out and shooting Following, getting it ready to
I think
go.
that's man. I didn't know that Emma had been there with him at the very beginning, and like I just feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's like so sweet and beautiful. Like that they, I mean, they're married now.
Yeah.
I don't know when they started dating and when they got married and everything, but it's just I don't know. It's just a really sweet story that like they like kind of in some ways kind of grew up together a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
she was there from the very beginning of his filmmaking journey, and she's been there
Yeah.
ever since, helping him produce all the films that he's made.
Yeah, and we'll kind of talk about like influences, inspiration. But yeah, he met her at a party in college, and they started dating, and I don't know, I don't remember at what point exactly that got married. But yeah, she was there from the beginning, really, and has been part of his movies like
Yeah, that's
the whole
really cool.
the whole time, which is, yeah, it is really cool. Um,
Hashtag goals.
yeah, yeah, I did want to briefly like go over like his career as far as like awards. He really like doesn't have as much prestige as far as like the awards go as you would think. Not at least not like the big ones. So
Hmm.
he has the one. He has had like nominations for the Academy. Memento actually got an Academy nomination for screenplay,
Mm.
which is really incredible. And it deserved it for sure. Inception had a nomination for screenplay and for Best Picture, and then Dunkirk had the nominations for directing and Best Picture, but he didn't win any of those. Um, and some of his movies have other category nominations for sure, but these are ones like directly
Yeah, I
related
was
to
gonna
Nolan.
say, did The
Um,
Dark Knight not have
yeah,
a Best Picture nomination? I mean, I know
no,
it won
it didn't.
for Heath Ledger.
So the
Wow.
reason they expanded the number of movies being nominated for Best Picture is because Dark Knight didn't get a nomination
Well,
for Best
I think
Picture.
they've always been kind of like anti superhero movie in
Yeah,
general,
but
but
I know that was like a big thing when Dark Knight didn't get the nomination for Best Picture. They it was the year after that they expanded
mm.
um, that category. Um, it was a
Yeah, I
whole
mean,
big thing.
there is definitely something to it that like he is such a well loved director, but at the same time, yeah, like I mean Spielberg, Scorsese, even like Ridley Scott, some of these people, way more of like these bigger, more prestigious awards.
Hmm.
So it is interesting that he does have such a cultural, you know, zeitgeist following, and yet
Yeah,
by traditional standards, he's not the most, allotted director.
right. Yeah, and I think by the rumors and murmurings like that is probably about to change this award season, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah,
I'd be very
Memento won.
surprised if not.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it didn't win something. But yeah, Memento won some stuff. He won the AFI, which is like American Film Institute Screenwriter of the Year for Memento. And then like for that year for the Independent Spirit Awards, which are becoming followed a little bit more for people that want to support independent movies. He actually like almost swept everything. He was nominated for 4 categories for the Independent Spirit Awards for Memento, and like almost swept. He won Best Feature, Best Directing and Screenplay, and the supporting female won for it, which obviously is not Nolan. But the only thing he didn't win for was cinematography for Memento for that the Independent Spirit, which I think is really cool. I think early on they really saw, and there's some other like interesting stuff about Memento that we'll get into on that episode. But yeah. I have a huge list of like inspirations and influences for him. And so I'm just going to like run through these and just like stop me if you want to talk about any of it. We've talked about some of it already, but obviously he has a lot of film influences. These are all things like he's talked about. And it's funny because a lot of times, like when you start watching like press stuff with directors, like you watch like I don't know, you'll be watching like the press release for like I don't know, Fast X, and the director will be talking about like they're basically like just naming movies that like are like some of the best movies of all time, and you're like, this movie has nothing to do with your movie. It's not like you can't just name these movies that like everyone loves and say it's an influence. But when you listen to this list, like you can see a little bit of all of this stuff in Nolan's films. Fritz Lang, early director of silent films.
Metropolis, I think,
Metropolis,
is his,
like
phenomenal silent film.
Early
love that
sci-fi
movie.
there. Stanley Kubrick,
Did you do
obviously.
Nosferatu as well?
No, that's Murnau. F.W. Murnau did Nosferatu. Ridley Scott, obviously. George Lucas and Spielberg, obviously. He talks about Malick, which he when I've heard him talk about Malick a couple times in like interviews, he knows that he's a very different director than Malick, but also like has such a high appreciation that you can kind of see some of the visuals that you see in Malick kind of bleed into some of the stuff he tries to capture.
Yeah,
I think
I haven't seen as many Terrence Malick movies, but I've heard a lot of people comparing specifically some moments in Oppenheimer to a very like Malick-esque visual style. I think the only movie of his I think I've 100% know I've seen is Thin Red Line. And to be honest with you, I remember I have not seen it in a while. I think I saw it when I was in high school, like rented it from the library. And to be honest with you, at the time, I think I remember not really liking it because it's like not really like because I think I was expecting a war movie, and it's not really a war movie from what I remember. I'd love to revisit that one.
Yeah. It is a war movie, but it's not a traditional way of doing a war movie. And I always tell people like there's certain directors that are better treated as poetry directors than prose directors, and Malick is definitely one of those. I can
definitely see the
narrative.
The Thin Red Line's influence on Dunkirk, which is also a kind of a non-traditional war film.
Yeah. And then like some other ones, like obviously like you have some Michael Mann modernism in there, especially like in the Dark Knight trilogy. David Lynch is somebody he talks about that I don't know if I see a whole lot of Lynch, except for earlier today when I watched those shorts. I was like, these look like strange like Lynch influenced shorts that a college student would make,
well, I know Lynch is really known for Oh, sorry. I
Go
just know
ahead.
Lynch is really known for his surrealism, and
Right.
so maybe
You
some
do
like
have a little bit
influence
of
on
that.
some parts of like Inception and Interstellar. I think
Mhm.
have some moments of surrealism, but yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a
again, Lynch
different
is not
sort of
someone I've seen a whole lot of his films, but
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess it's just
I
the
always
feeling that
it's like
you
a lot
get
more
from the
horror
surrealism is different.
influenced. I feel like.
Yeah, it makes you uneasy, the surrealism of Lynch, whereas I don't think Nolan's surrealism really makes you uneasy necessarily. It's more like captivating surrealism. Um,
Right,
and then
right.
the last one I have for film is Hitchcock, and I've been watching a
Of
little bit more
course.
Hitchcock recently, and like you can see it for sure. Like the way that Nolan is so focused on like building tension is very much influenced by Hitchcock.
I mean, Hitchcock's another director. I think he made so many
Mhm.
4.5 to 5 out of 5 for me. I mean, Rear Window, one of the best
Yeah.
movies I've ever seen.
Mhm.
Vertigo's great. I think my favorite Hitchcock film, I mean, Psycho's great, obviously, but one of my favorites
Right.
is Dial M for Murder. I don't know if you've
Okay.
seen that one, but
Yeah.
you want to talk
I
about
haven't
building
seen a lot of
tension? Like,
Hitchcock. Yeah. I'm working
yeah.
my way through.
Well, with Dial M for Murder, I won't spoil anything for you, but like if you want to talk about building tension, the second half of the movie is like an hour straight of just trying to figure out if someone is or isn't going to get away with something. And
Yeah.
it's like every other scene it like shifts one way or the other, and it, oh my gosh, it is so good. I mean, I know a lot of people are very like apprehensive sometimes about watching like older films, but I'm telling you, like some of Hitchcock's films, like the tension that he was able to build is right up there with
Mhm.
any modern director, and that's why so many
Yeah.
of them are inspired by someone like
Yeah.
Hitchcock for sure. So yeah, Rear
For
Window
sure.
is
Yeah.
great. You know, uh, Dial M for Murder. I have not seen Rope. That's the one I've really been wanting to see. That I've heard
Mm.
is like one of his best, and I haven't had a chance, but
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely highly recommend.
I was recommended watching Rope also
North
not
by
that long
Northwest.
ago.
That's another good one.
Um, I mean, yeah, they're all good, I guess. But yeah, I would. That's like film influences. He has a lot of literary influences. I'll hit some of the big ones. So like, he mentions Graham Swift's 1983 novel Waterland, which I don't know anything about except that he kind of counts it as his first
It was
encounter
one of
with
the
a
biggest flop
story
films of all
along.
time.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the film, but the novel was
No,
his first. First, are you talking about Waterworld?
I was just a joke about Waterworld because you said Waterland. So
Yeah, I totally missed that
I
at
like
first.
that movie.
Uh, yeah, but yeah, this Nolan says this novel was his first encounter with a story along multiple timelines, which obviously becomes a huge part of his
Mm.
filmmaking. And then two other, I'll mention. I have more written down, but I'll mention two other big literary influences. One is a guy named Raymond Chandler who has pretty well known books. I've heard of The Big Sleep before, and then Farewell My Lovely is another one I saw. Um, uh, but yeah, I've never read him, but he's actually also credited as a screenwriter for Strangers on the Train by Hitchcock.
Mm.
But yeah, he's kind of counted. I saw somewhere that he's kind of counted as like the quote unquote godfather of noir.
Mm.
So he was writing these noir style novels that were a big influence on Nolan. And funny enough, he actually spent his childhood going back and forth between Chicago and London, just like Nolan did,
Oh
which
wow.
is really coincidental. And then the other big literary influence is a guy named Jorge Luis or Luis Borges. I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
butchering his name because he is Argentinian. He's kind of like a poet philosopher, and his kind of stories and poetry is described as metaphysical tales woven from dreams and memory. And if that
Where
doesn't
have I heard
sound
that
like a
before?
Nolan film, yeah, if
Okay.
that doesn't sound like a Nolan film, then what does? So those were two like big literary influences. Yeah, I have a few like other sorts of influences. Obviously, you have guys like astrophysicist Kip Thorne that like he is very interested and influenced by because of his interest in space. That probably culminates in Interstellar. Um, Guys like MC Escher, who was a Dutch artist that is famous for like those geometrically precise illusions. So like think
Mm-hmm.
about like the staircase that like leads to nowhere, like never ending staircase, like stuff like that was a big influence on Nolan. I mean, you just think about stuff he does like in Inception and in
Mm-hmm.
other places where it's like these mathematically structured sets that are, I mean, he literally does like the stairs that lead to nowhere in one of the
Right.
dreams things in
Inception. Yeah.
Inception. Um, you have a couple of architects, Frank Lloyd Wright and Ludwig Miss Van der Rohe. Probably butchering that too, but they were like very future-gazing architects that he experienced a lot of their work in Chicago, and
Right.
architecture was like is obviously a huge part of his films too. And then the last one I wrote, like kind of jumping back to an earlier conversation, is he talks about his now wife Emma Thomas being just a huge, profound impact on his career. Not just as like he talks about, not just as like a sounding board, but being, the main person that is like a guiding force, like pushing him to be able to express his ideas and his work.
It's
So yeah,
just so beautiful.
yeah,
It's
it's really
so
cool.
cool.
Yeah, it's really like sweet and nice hearing him talk about like how important she is to him. Um, yeah, I love that.
It's kind of I feel like it's kind of a pretty rare thing in Hollywood.
It is.
Like
Yeah, it is.
people when they do get married, they don't do a lot of like praising their spouses. So it's just nice to
Sure.
hear.
Yeah, it is for sure. Um, but yeah, we can kind of get into like some filmmaking philosophy and technique and all that sort of stuff now. Uh, yeah, I mean, really, like we could spend hours talking about all this stuff, but people will only listen to this for so long. It's already a long podcast in general. Um,
Not diving into a
so let
specific movie for
yeah,
sure.
let's run through some of this stuff. So, and these are all things that are not going to be very surprising if you're familiar with Nolan at all. One of the things is that he's just thinking about his filmmaking philosophy in general. He is very interested in like suspense as a visual language. Um, he talks about when he talks about like Fritz Lang and other like silent directors, just like watching these silent films and just knowing like that suspense is being built visually. Like you don't need dialogue, you don't need anything but the visuals to build suspense, and so that's something that like he really like tries to put in his movies. He likes to give you like the protagonist's point of view, and like
Yeah.
including his flaws. He doesn't want you to like see his protagonist as like this perfect individual, but also like have you experience the world they're in through their perspective, but also like through their flawed perspective, which is really a big part of what he
Right.
does, I think.
Well, especially on that one
Mm-hmm.
with Oppenheimer literally being written in first
Yeah.
person in the quote unquote subjective scenes, and then the other thing that I love is is Tenet. The John David Washington's character is literally called the protagonist.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So is great.
Yeah, for sure. And even along the kind of character line, he likes to like when he's thinking of his characters, he thinks of them as real people. And one of the things he does, so you kind of get this like it's kind of probably a common press question of like, oh, did you have so and so in mind when you wrote this role? And Nolan's answer is always like, no, like he doesn't write that way. He sees like trying to think of an actor for a character as like limiting on his writing. And so when he's writing, he's not thinking of who's going to play this. You can even see recent interviews of like him talking about Cillian Murphy, like he said, he has the screenplay like written, and he's like, okay, now I got to figure out who's going to do this. And he looks at the cover of the book that's the main, you know, source material for the movie, and sees the face of Oppenheimer, and just like Cillian Murphy's face comes to mind as someone who could have that face. But yeah, it was after, like, he wasn't thinking about that while he was writing it out. I think that's really, really cool, and really like not necessarily like unique to him, but something that like can set, you know, a character apart, I guess. Because a lot of writers do think of actors while they're writing parts, and like write them for actors specifically. But yeah, you know, he likes, obviously that film noir is a big influence on him, and one of the main things that film noir does is you don't ever know. It's hard to know who to trust in a film noir, but you define the characters by their actions, not by their words, because there's a lot of lies and a lot of deception going on in a noir. And so you have to define people by their actions. And that's something that he tries to work into all of his scripts, is like, not, you know, they may say one thing, but he wants the audience to define the character by the actions that they actually take.
Right.
Yeah. And then, yeah, like more general things, like he loves to think of like cinema as something that has no rules or limitations. So like whatever you can think up and dream up, he said, like, put it on the screen if you want to make a film. And that's one of the reasons he loves Kubrick, is because Kubrick he threw like rules out the window about how you're supposed to, like, what makes a great film, and did his own thing. And that was inspiring to Nolan. So he tries to, you know, take the same philosophy, I guess. And along those same lines, like, you'll hear him say over and over in interviews, like, you know, if you want to make movies, play to your strengths. Meaning like, do what you think is a good idea, and what you're passionate about, and what is going to make this movie something that only you can make. That's what's going to make it distinctive. And then, yeah, you know, there's a lot of stuff you can get into as far as his philosophy. But yeah, we can kind of run into like some of his technique, because a lot of that comes through in his techniques.
Right.
But yeah, when I say like the story of a Nolan film, like what do you think about first?
It's gonna be a bunch of wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff, man. It's gonna be, you know, it's
exactly
a lot of different things happening all at the same time. You know, backwards, forwards. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, he's definitely really become a master of the non-linear structure for sure.
Yeah, and that's what I have. The first thing written down under the story section in the outline: non-linear structures. It's like if you look up like any YouTube essay, that's what it's going to talk about, is the non-linear structure of his stories. But yeah, he plans like these things out very like precisely, using like diagrams. Like you can see a video of him, you know, drawing out the diagram for how he worked out the you know, fitting together of the sequences in Memento, which is just like, it's ingenious, really, like what he did with that. But yeah, you know, that those nonlinear structures are something that he's really like put into the mainstream, I think, in his films. Other things like in his story, obviously you have like you have time as like a motif in pretty much all of his stories. He's very interested in time. He shows it through characters aging. He shows it through like literally showing you clocks and you know, bomb timers counting down in Batman movies, and you know, like you know, a lot of characters discuss time. How much time is left, what happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
And the time, he really wants to make the time felt in his movies to kind of align you with the way that the characters are feeling it.
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting about all of his movies is like his characters are very interested in like the philosophical implications of their actions.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a lot of like exposition on like, if this is what we do, then what are the implications of that?
Mm-hmm.
Which, that's probably one of the things that like his harshest critics probably don't like about his movies. But if you like thinking philosophically like Nolan does, and I sort of do too, then it can work for you.
I think it also,
yeah.
well, also the other part of it too is that, some of his movies have very big concepts, and when you have a big concept, you have to kind of explain the rules, and there's a lot of, it's really hard to do that without just having characters talk about it. And I think all of his exposition is typically character motivated. Like, it doesn't just happen out of the blue. Like, I think about an Inception where you have you know Elliot Page's character, like asking a lot of questions, getting a lot of answers from Cobb and the team, or same thing with like Tenet, where we follow the protagonist and he's asking this, he's asking that, and he's like having it explained to him. So, and I feel like then Oppenheimer is probably the most like overtly philosophical, where it's like you literally have characters asking like, "Are we sure we want to do this? Like, we want to make this bomb, like this or that?" And also Oppenheimer's kind of, I guess, lack of a spine is kind of like one of the plot points too. Like, one of the reoccurring themes of the movie is that he's being asked all these very intense philosophical questions by people, and he doesn't really want to give any like definitive answer, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, part of that, I guess like his characters are always like, it's funny, like, because I feel like some of his movies, his characters are more like ideas than they are people. And then other ones, like, they feel very much more like people and like very personal. And they kind of work in different ways. I don't think Nolan would describe them as that. But that's kind of like my subjective feel of his movies, as like that is one thing that's a connective tissue, is they are interested in like, what are the implications of what I do? And it's obviously like probably something that Nolan is interested in, maybe not just like personally, but just like philosophically, about like the way humans are, like thinking about why we do what we do, sort of thing. Yeah, like you get into like his production design and his cinematography, it's very much like, let's do the most with what we have, and let's keep it as real as we can. So like, obviously, like, he loves shooting on location whenever he can. He loves practical effects. No CGI to like minimal CGI. I really feel like I'm pretty sure I read that like there's no CGI in Oppenheimer. It's all just VFX.
Which right, which I think people. I think most people, when they hear like no CGI, they're like, "Oh, there's nothing digital in this movie." It's like, no, like visual effects is different.
It's not that.
Like, they shot things practically and then used visual effects to enhance them, but the basis of everything was some sort of practical effect. I mean, because even something as simple as like like digital cleanup and stuff like that. I mean, there's a really good VFX breakdown for, I want to say it was Mindhunters, the David Fincher series on Netflix. There's like this reel you can see where you can
Okay,
see
yeah.
like how much they changed the environments using visual effects, but they're still shooting in practical environments. But they're like, even something as simple as like
Right.
deleting like a dolly track off the ground, that's a visual effect. But
Mhm.
but yeah, no, he tries to do everything as practical as possible. I
Right.
mean, the infamous story about in Tenet where he wanted to crash the plane into the airplane hangar, and he's like, it's just cheaper just to crash an actual plane into the
Yeah.
hangar.
Yeah.
Also uses a ton of models as well. Does a lot of like model work.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of model work instead of green screen, and that's a big thing. Like he hates working with green screen. So you think about like CGI is going to be using a lot of green screen. The actors are
Mhm.
kind of acting on a set stage with like basically nothing but green screens, and everything is added in computer generated after. Like the opposite would be thinking about like the hallway scene in Inception. He actually like built
Mhm.
a rotating model that his actors were inside of. That could have easily been done like with CGI and green screening, but like he chose to actually like create that hallway and like on this like rotating. Like you can go watch videos of it. It's really cool. But yeah, he's very much interested
Mhm.
in having. I mean, this is a man with no email and no cell phone. So he's interested in
Right.
shooting
Yeah.
things for real. Um, and yeah, so and then like a lot of that carries over with the cinematography too. Obviously, like he loves shooting on film, um, which I don't think. I think all of his films pretty much are 100% shot on film, meaning like not shot with like digital cameras, but shot on like actual cellular film. Um, and
Yeah, I don't,
yeah,
and I honestly don't know if he ever would shoot anything on digital.
yeah, yeah, he's been one of the big like mainstays, like keeping film going. I think like guys like him and Wes Anderson have been, we covered Wes, big proponents of shooting on film,
Mhm.
even as digital is like taking over. Um, which I greatly appreciate. But even I listened to an interview the other day with Nolan, and he doesn't like deride digital filmmaking. He sees it as like a different process and just different.
Right.
And he doesn't like say like if you shoot digital like you're doing it wrong. It's just he sees it as different, and he prefers the shooting on film. Um, yeah, I love one of the things that like really like carried over starting with Following was just like he had like basically no budget, and so he
Mhm.
had to figure out how to do things both practically and like circumstantially. So Following, they just didn't really have access to like very much lighting, and so they
Right.
had to use a lot of like you watch Following, and there's always a character beside a window,
Mhm.
because they're using the lighting from that. And you see like when they're walking in the streets and Following, it's a lot of like handheld camera work, because and we'll talk about it more next week, but like they couldn't get the permits they needed to shoot in public, so they were basically like guerrilla style shooting,
Mhm.
with handheld for those street shots. And like you see really a lot of that carry over. Like, I mean, you can go watch on YouTube videos, like where kind of YouTube essay guys are like breaking down like this sorts of shots and Following that have kind of like followed throughout his career with like window lighting and stuff like that. Which is I think is really cool. And
Yeah, it's
another
free,
thing that I
and
really thought, yeah, it's free,
well,
exactly.
in the Windows
Um,
an instant softbox as well. So that's like a really usually,
mhm,
unless it's like direct harsh sunlight, it's like a really nice diffused light, which flatters
mhm,
people.
right, yeah, and he talks about like as his obviously budgets grew and the movies got bigger, he's still like, so like for a movie like Following, you basically like have to make something that is beyond your budget because you have like basically no budget. And so like he's tried to keep that mindset. Like he talks about like Tenet, like obviously like he has this huge budget for Tenet. He said, but I'm still like trying to do more than what my budget allows for. Because for one thing, like just business wise, like you want to put something out there that's worth more than what's spent on it. But also like that's just his mindset of like, I want to challenge myself technically to do more with what I have than I should be able to do creatively, which is just an awesome mindset to have. Another thing with his cinematography that I thought was really cool was he doesn't like using zoom lenses. He likes to put the camera there. So like there's a scene in Insomnia where Al Pacino is like on the phone with someone, and it's a close-up shot of him on the phone. And you can look up like making of footage, and there's the camera is like right there in Al Pacino's face.
Yeah.
I mean like
Yeah.
like this like hand in front of your face close to him. And but yeah, Nolan talks about like, you know, because he decided to do that instead of using a zoom lens, it really gives Pacino like the kind of claustrophobic, like someone's right there in front of his face kind of feeling for the shot, which was necessary for like the mood of the conversation he was having. But also just like that's what Nolan felt would get the best shot instead of using a zoom. So a lot of just stuff like that, you know, isn't really like typical. Like you don't really hear about people doing that sort of thing often.
And the other thing I really respect about Nolan, that people may not realize, that like, you know, the beauty of working on a film is that it's a collaborative process. So there are actually directors or have made movies that don't necessarily know that much about the camera itself. Like they may not know all the technical stuff, and they'll just say like, I want a shot that looks like this, or. But Nolan actually often, you know, is he's very hands-on. He often operates the camera himself at some points. I mean, obviously, he's been able to work with phenomenal cinematographers, especially most recently, he's been working with Hoyt van Hoytema, which is like the fakest name I've ever heard. But, you know, what a...
For sure.
I mean, but now that I think I first heard his name watching some BTS about Nope, because Jordan Peele was talking about Hoyt van Hoytema and how they developed the process to make that movie. And I was like, who is this guy? And then I realized the movies he had shot, and I was like, this is like one of my new favorite cinematographers. I mean, right up there with like, you know, Roger Deakins, I think, for sure.
Right. Yeah, and so he does have a few guys that like are kind of like regular collaborators. Like for
I was trying to remember, was it Wally or Walter?
Wally Pfister.
Yeah. And then he went and made that movie Transcendence, which they tried to hype up as like the movie made by Nolan's protege, and it like was not good at all.
Yeah. He that was a big flop. Was that
he tried?
Johnny Depp was in it, I think, right?
Yeah, he wasn't bad.
Yeah,
but it just was just a really very silly movie.
Yeah. But yeah, one of the things like I think that comes through too in his technique is like the editing. Like obviously like he's not like his early films he did edit, but obviously as he gets going, like he's not editing his movies. But also like when you're a director of a movie, like you still have a big part that you play in that process. And the way you shoot, the way like you shoot and how many takes you do like has a big part to play in the editing process and how easy or difficult it is. Like for instance, one of the things that I came across that was kind of like, oh, that makes sense is early on, and even like all throughout his filmography, he uses a lot of like insert shots of objects. Whether it be like a picture or an item that has significance narratively. So like it brings meaning when you do this like insert shot of this picture. And like early on, it was a necessity to use that because it's really easy and quick to shoot, and it carries a lot. It tells a lot for the narrative by shooting that object and showing it. And like when you're doing the editing, like it's really quick to throw that in there and easy.
Yeah.
And so, but that became something that like he just kept, because early
Well, I
on he
really
was
love.
working.
Oh, yeah, sorry. What were you saying?
Yeah, no, I was just saying like it's one of those things he kept because he used it early on, and it really worked well for him, I guess.
Yeah.
And I feel like it still does.
Yeah, I guess I'll turn my light because my light just died. So unprepared for this, but all right, there we go. Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say, like, I especially love that he kind of started utilizing. He's really good at using like an insert, and then like that you don't really
Mhm.
get at first, and then showing the importance of it later. Like I
Yeah,
always remember in
absolutely.
Tenet, like towards the beginning of the movie, during like the opera heist, there's like a shot of like the little like coin thing dangling off of that one guy's pack, and then at
Mhm.
the end of the
Yeah.
movie, you see it again on the guy that like takes a bullet for the protagonist, and you realize it's Robert Pattinson's
Yeah.
character at some point.
Well,
And
the
so
first
that's
thing
his
that comes to mind
closing.
as far as that goes would be like the hats and all the
Mhm.
hats in
Yeah, the
Prestige.
opening shot of Prestige. Yeah,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
at first you're like,
Um,
who attacked the hat factory?
yeah, right.
And then you end up realizing, what it's from. The
Yeah.
cats too,
Yeah,
right?
for
Isn't
sure.
there like a bunch of cats in the opening shot?
Yeah, I don't remember.
I think I remember it being hats
Um,
and cats.
yeah, and you have the lights too, the little light bulbs.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, so that and then like even like the nonlinear structure was kind of like uh for editing just early on when you're having to work only on weekends and like with a
Mm-hmm.
very low budget and trying to put stuff together quickly, like coming up with a nonlinear structure where you don't have to spend like hours and hours, putting stuff in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like was actually like editing thing that has carried over, even though I think he probably would have had that even without that. It's kind of, I guess, happy coincidence that that sort of editing happened to be easier for him early on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, and then you like think about too, like the way time is edited into his movies, like, cutting between different like things in time, like in Dunkirk and Inception, different like speeds of time, I guess, like the way those are edited together.
Mm-hmm.
And then like even just in like the way scenes are shot, like, so the van falling in Inception, that was shot from I think between certain parts of it like 700 frames per second, and then like other parts of it 2000 frames per second. And so like you're getting so much from those shots, and it's slowed down so
Right.
much that
Plus, just
you're like,
the well, I was gonna say the technical and narrative aspect of the melding together of like the various different levels of that too is
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
crazy.
it's like the technical aspects are like have narrative and like
Mm-hmm.
I guess like emotional function, which I think is important for his movies. And then like yeah, even moving into like his music, one of the things that I really appreciate, um, like digging into him, is that Nolan never uses temp music,
Mm-hmm.
which is very unusual. Usually, so the way it usually works is directors will be making a movie and they'll pull music and scores from other stuff, and kind of put it over their film. I don't know how much people know about how films made, but like the music isn't playing while they're filming. Like they do all the
Right.
filming and then they add the music in. And so like in the meantime, they'll add in scores or music from other stuff to kind of like give the composer a feel for what they want. And then the composer works from there. Well, Christopher Nolan sees that as limiting, because he says, as soon as you take this and say, I want something like this, and then the composer has to take that and make something else, you're like a step away from what you actually wanted. And so,
right.
Yeah.
Well, the other problematic thing with it is that gets people in trouble sometimes is the editor will edit the scene with the temp music, and then if the composer comes up with something different, then it can change how the scene feels. Also, this is why you sometimes end up with movies that their score sounds very similar to another movie because they use that movie's score as their temp music. And when the director was like, I want something that sounds like this, they like take it more literally, or it's like the scene doesn't work if it doesn't have that same flow. So that's why they have to make a song. Yeah. So it definitely is a harder process, but you know, again, just like with his cinematographers, I think Nolan, I mean, the only other thing other than the secrecy and the, I know I'm going to be in for like a really intense narrative, the only other thing I instantly think of when I think of Christopher Nolan is the music. I mean, I think you could argue that, you know, half of Christopher Nolan's notoriety is due to the genius of Hans Zimmer, who I would also say is the greatest of all time. And even the stuff he's been doing with Ludwig Göransson for the last two films has all been phenomenal. And I think that guy, maybe a couple more films under his belt, I think he'll be right up there with your John Williams and your Hans Zimmers and your, you know, Howard Shores and all these other people. But
I mean, I've been humming the Interstellar like dun, 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 all day in my head. I can't get it out of there.
Cornfield Chase.
I haven't even listened to it. It just like I've been thinking about Nolan movies, and that score like is stuck in my head now. But yeah, and one of the things that's really so like, you know, just like wrapping that thought up of like not using the temp music, he actually like sits down with the composers and like goes over the screenplay. They talk about the moods and they talk about like all that sort of stuff. And then when they're filming, Nolan will send like stills and images and stuff like that. And then whoever's composing, whether it's Hans or Göransson or whoever it is, it's like sending back ideas. And Nolan, like it's like a back and forth conversation at that point, which, you know, to me, like, so like this is something that's similar to Wes. Like Wes starts the music process very early on for Wes Anderson movies, like with whether it's with Dupla or whoever he's working with composing, like he's thinking of the music early on. So he doesn't really necessarily need temp music because he's
right.
And it's a similar thing, I guess, with Nolan. There's a parallel there. And both of their movies, like music is such a huge part of their films and the feel of them and the way things are conveyed. And like when you think about those movies, you think about the music along with the movie. And yeah, I really love that. And Nolan even says like he just has, that's become such a huge part of his process is the music. That he doesn't know how to make it, but it's just something that means so much to him that like he has to be like have his hands in that part of it.
I mean, I think he does a really good job.
I was going to say, I think like even like for Dunkirk, Hans Zimmer was like being like in an interview has said like Nolan might as well be like a co-composer for Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think he does a really great job of loading the bases so that way other people can shine, you know? And so like just thinking about like how much because he's so involved in every level of his storytelling, like just thinking about how much care he puts into making sure that his other collaborators are set up for success as well, like sending over images, you know, coming up with ideas really very intensely. And I think that's why the scores for some of his films are some of the most iconic film scores of all time. I mean, you know, Inception, Interstellar, the Dark Knight trilogy, all coming to mind. All absolutely phenomenal. You know, I don't know how many other people out there are like me, but sometimes I'll listen to movie scores just
Yeah.
just on a whim, even during working out sometimes, listen to the Interstellar soundtrack or something like that, and so yeah, I mean, I think it really shows how much care he puts into his storytelling on every single level.
Yeah. Yeah, and even like jumping out of music real quick and thinking back to like one of the things he talks about is like he really has learned to think in three-dimensional space instead of
Mhm.
like two-dimensional. And so he does, like when he's on set, for one, like there's no like assistants like on set. Like he, as far as like sometimes directors will like have assistants go like work on certain shoots for them, and they're not there necessarily for like lesser stuff, I guess. But he's
Mhm.
there for everything shot. He's beside the camera. He does one of the things, he doesn't use a monitor on set, which is
Right.
pretty unusual. Um, because he doesn't want to get in a two-dimensional mindset. He wants to stay in the space right beside the camera. It's something unique about him, and it comes through in his movies. The way that his camera moves is very three-dimensional, but not disorienting.
Right.
To contrast, I think about like a lot of stuff that Disney has put out, whether it's Marvel or these live action remakes recently. They're very much moving through three-dimensional space, but to me it's disorienting. Like it because a lot of it, for one, is like digitally done, and two, like they're not working within a real space, and so like you lose that sense of orientation in the space, uh where like so like two things that come to
Right.
mind, like the Little Mermaid, uh you know live action, like there's the boat scene, and it's so disorienting. Like I don't know where I am in that whole scene. Like
Yeah.
it
What?
gave me a headache. And then like another one is like the new sort of like and I know you like the new Guardians movie, but like the scene where they're in the hallway and the camera's just like kind of running around everywhere through this like fight that's happening, is just like it's
Yeah.
very disorienting for me, and it takes me out of, I can't enjoy those moments as much. Maybe some people do, that's great, but for me
Yeah.
it's like so disorienting. But Christopher Nolan is always so grounded, even though like you think about the way his camera moves around stuff and within stuff in The Dark Knight. It's incredible how grounded you still feel, and I think that
Yeah.
stems from that philosophy that he has.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is because he does everything as practically as possible.
Right?
Although
Yeah.
as much as I did love Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, yeah, I definitely, I think what you're describing is it's an issue where when you're creating an entirely digital environment, and a lot of big blockbusters are nowadays,
Hmm.
so the issue arrives when you forget to treat the digital, like, camera within that space as a physical object. So when it's a 100% CG shot, and you have the freedom to literally move the camera in whatever way you want, the disorientation
Hmm.
arrives from them being, very willy nilly with it, so to speak, and forgetting to treat it as a physical object, even though it is in a
Yeah.
digital 3D space.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's not the
yeah,
problem. The problem isn't with the technology, because it's just the way that it's
right,
used.
right,
You think like, so like
right.
Avatar: Way of Water, James Cameron does an incredible job in those underwater scenes. Like I never felt
Hmm.
disoriented. I always felt like I was within the space, even though I know like there's a lot of computer generation. And so it's not the
Right,
problem, it's the philosophy. And this is
exactly.
the way that Nolan has implemented that philosophy well, is by being there beside the camera, having a feel for the
Right.
three-dimensional space. Cameron uses the same philosophy, just with computer generation, I
Hmm.
guess.
Right.
Um,
Again, like I said, like he treats that digital, the camera that you put within the digital software, he treats it as a physical object, doesn't move it in an unnatural way. That's when the disorientation arrives, is when the camera starts moving in ways you're like, and it's a subconscious thing, right? Like your brain is watching a movie, and your brain is telling you, there's no way a human being could like move the camera that way, and that's kind of where
Right.
the disorientation arrives. But I do think on a very rare occasion it does kind of work, like the hallway one shot, even though it was all digitally stitched together. I really did love that scene, but I
Yeah,
definitely
and I've
get
heard
what you
other
mean
people
where
that did, but
it can be
it
a
just
little disorienting.
it wasn't for me. Yeah. Yeah, as far as technique goes, I think the last thing that I really thought was super interesting is you kind of hear Nolan and others kind of around him talk about shepherd tones, which if you don't know what a shepherd tone is, it's hard to describe like just by telling you. Or at least for me, it makes more sense seeing it visually happen. But it's this thing in music where you have like three tones like building in octave, building up an octave, up the scale, but then like one drops off and the other picks up where it left off. And it's literally just playing like the same like rise all at the same time. It's not actually keeping on going higher, but it sounds like the intensity of it makes it sound like it is. And it just like builds it just like it has a huge intensity to it. And like so both in like what both in like what Zimmer and who's the new composer that he's been using,
Ludwig Göransson.
Yeah, Göransson. What something that kind of Christopher works with his composers is like you kind of hear some of that sort of stuff in the scores. So you're building this intensity with these shepherd tones, but Nolan takes that idea, that like musical idea, and he talks about trying to do that with the way he interweaves his stories together, which you can totally see. They like you have, especially in stuff like Inception and I think Tenet and Dunkirk is probably the places where it's most like obviously seen, where you have these different things happening that are like interweaving story, like timeline things that like build an intensity in their own ways, and then kind of like he like braids them together in the end. And I just think that's really cool how he took this like musical concept and like both uses that musical concept of building intensity within his scores, and then also like tries to like model a storytelling structure off of that idea of building intensity through these overlapping like timelines, I guess. Yeah, I just thought that was really cool and interesting. But yeah, and then of course, like with the music, you have the clock tick in the Christopher Nolan movie scores. You can hear it in. I mean, in a lot of the scores, you can hear this like clock ticking element. It's especially like in Interstellar and Dunkirk. It's like it's very apparent. But you can hear it some in Inception and yeah, it's there. And I think the one in Dunkirk is it's either like it's either based on or recorded from Nolan's stopwatch. I can't remember which one, but either way, that's really cool.
Yeah. One of the things, once I get my show up and running, I want to really do a deep dive episode into Hans Zimmer, because I feel like he's really like revolutionized the film scoring world on a couple different occasions. Most recently with the ticking clock motif. I feel like every single like period war film since Dunkirk, like the marketing just has it's all about like it's all labeled as like time running out. You have the clock. I mean, I think about the trailers for like 1917, very similar in vibe. Obviously the movie itself isn't necessarily similar, but yeah, that's definitely something I feel like a lot of other films from like World War One, World War Two have kind of implemented into their marketing as well.
Right. Yeah, and that's very much like comes from his collaboration with, like I said, Hans Zimmer said that Nolan might as well be credited as a co-composer for the score on Dunkirk,
Right.
which is a testament to, like,
Mhm.
you know, it's one of those things where, like, it's like an iron sharpens iron sort of thing. Like, you have one of the best
Mhm.
directors, filmmakers working with one of the best, like, composers, and, like, they make each other better. Nolan's
Right. Absolutely.
pushing Hans and making him better, and Hans is pushing Nolan and making him better. Which is you gotta love that. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's there's most certainly much more we could talk about as far as his technique goes, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that as we go through the films. But I wanted to touch
Absolutely.
on just some themes, just to kind of like have some things on our mind as we watch through this filmography, of just some common themes. And a lot of this actually we've talked about, because a lot of his themes are built into both like his filmmaking philosophy and really like the technique he uses. And really, like, you could even say that one of his underlying themes in almost all of his movies is just interested in, the nature of film as a medium, and like and
Mhm.
storytelling as a way of like conveying ideas. Like, he's telling stories about storytelling, and he's making films that are kind of have an underlying thing about film and that as a medium.
Mhm.
So like that, that's something that's definitely there. Uh Time, we've talked about time, I think that goes without saying. But then like things like perception, like what point of view do you have, playing with that, giving you the
Right.
point of view of the character, where like you're not sure. It's kind of like the what's the term, the narrator that you can't trust sort of thing. There's a term for that, but I just
Mhm.
can't think of it in the moment. Um
Yeah.
and then
Me
like
neither.
yeah the subjectivity, I think subjectivity is a big theme, which doesn't sound like it a theme, but it really is. It's that idea of like what is real for you, and what
Right.
subjectively what is real for you, and what carries meaning for you. I think the subjectivity of that, and that's like kind of a common thing for humanity, um, as a
Mhm.
whole, I think is a theme. Like, even starting with Following, like there's this whole monologue about items that people keep and hold as dear, even though they're worthless. And the subjectivity of
Right.
that is there from like the very beginning in Following. Um, yeah, there's this like, so like Nolan, a lot of that stuff is like more small scale stuff, but like on a large scale, there's this endeavor that it seems like Nolan has in all of his films, and that his characters have, where they really want to like unlock the mystery of it all.
Mhm.
They're looking for this secret machine that is making the world work like it the way it does, and trying to unlock that. Um, and like in doing so, figuring out what drives the world for what, whether it's a protagonist or an antagonist in the movie trying to do that. They have their
Mhm.
different motives for that. But that is like a kind of a grander scale theme that you see, is like what makes the world tick, pun intended, and and
Yeah.
even on a smaller scale, like what makes the human mind tick, like what drives the moral decisions that we make, what drives the um just like why we do what we do, that sort of idea.
Mhm.
um and really like I really love this. There's a small, like, little kind of almost like devotional, you could say, book, on Nolan's works by Elijah Davidson, who I'm hoping to have on the podcast. I have him scheduled for one of the episodes, and hoping that stays on the schedule and works out. But he's done some different writings on film. He kind of breaks down in his little book on Nolan, which let me pull it up so I get the title of that right. It's just called Christopher Nolan Transcending Time. He says that basically, like, most of Nolan's plots can be broken down to time being transcended, a world being transformed, and love being sort of a savior of everything in a sense. And I really think that's a profound way of looking at Nolan films in a grand. Yeah. Interstellar, I think, is the culmination of that.
Love is the only thing that transcends all dimensions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's said explicitly there, but right. But it's there, like, really in a lot of his stuff. But there is just wrapping up this. There is, like, when we think about his filmography, and this is something else that, like, Elijah Davidson's introduction to, he has an introduction, then, like, something on each film in that small little book. I recommend getting that. It's, like, really cheap for Kindle. But yeah, he has this idea that he made me think about in that introduction, where he talks about, like, the trajectory of his films, and how, like, you start off with things like Following and Memento and Insomnia, and there's a lot of, like, those movies are, like, some of his darkest movies. There's a lot of despair and cynicism, like, kind of underlying things in those movies, and a lot of it is, like, they're in these, like, crises, and there's, like, despair and hopelessness in that.
Right.
Whereas, like, but as you, like, move along the trajectory of his career, he starts, those characters still have, like, his characters always still have those crises, but instead of, like, leaving them more in those crises, they're working. It's like this trajectory of moving from despair to love, and from cynicism to hope. And I think that's really profound insight into the filmography of Nolan. Is, as we watch these movies, that's something that we can keep in mind, is seeing, like, the work of a filmmaker playing out as maybe he's, and this is something that Nolan usually pushes back on, is, like, these are, he sees himself more as a craftsman than an artist. He's been quoted saying that, and meaning, like, artists usually are making things out of themselves, and he sees himself as more like making a craft. But I think it's still there. I think the artistry still comes through, and there probably is a degree to which, like, Nolan himself is working through this idea of moving from cynicism to hope, and from despair to love, just personally. And I really do think you see that as more and more, like, his protagonist, as, like, flawed and in crisis as they are more and more trying to wrestle with and deal with, like, these moral quandaries that they find themselves in, trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, and how do I go about doing that, even though, like, I'm human and flawed, and like, he kind of says the thing that that Interstellar, Dunkirk, and Tenet all have in common is, like, how to find the moral strength to do good even when everything seems lost. And so it is this trajectory of, where he leaves you in things like Memento and Insomnia, with, they're very much less hopeful movies, to, like, movies that are about in the midst of hopelessness, still finding like the moral strength to do good, and do what's right.
Right.
And I just really like that idea, and wanted to close the theme section with that thinking through like that overarching theme. It's something that I love finding when you're going through a filmography of a director, that you can see a thread going through these movies, and this one's thread is kind of like a trajectory of thematic elements through his movies, which I think is really cool, and will be interesting as we work through these to see how that sort of plays out.
Sorry. Okay, so I've kind of like before we move into the kind of the fun end of the episode stuff. The question I've had in my mind is, it's a two-part. I'd love to hear what you think. What genre has Christopher Nolan not dabbled with you'd like to see him dabble with? And is there a particular franchise you'd love to see him create an entry for? That's
the second one
question.
Yeah, the second one is easy because it's something that he would love to do. He's like on record saying that he would love to, and I think he would do incredibly well with, and that's a Bond movie. Christopher Nolan, like if he were to pick up like the Bond franchise, I think it would just be so fun, and really good. But yeah, the first one, a genre that he hasn't actually entirely done. So I'll say I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, and I've heard that there's like kind of horror-ish elements to the movie. I don't know how true that really
there's some
is,
sequences,
or if it's just like an
I've
intensity.
Seen it twice. I would say there are some elements, especially towards the end, that kind of are a little like psychological horror in nature.
Okay.
Kind of as Oppenheimer's kind of started to come to terms with what's actually like happening. There's like one particular sequence, it's like my favorite sequence in the movie, and a lot of people have talked about it, that does have a little bit of like psychological horror elements to it, but not nearly as much as some people were kind of hyping up in the early reviews.
That I think that's probably something that I'd like to see him like have a go at, is a more traditional like horror genre, because one of the things he loves to do is like turn a genre on its head, kind of do something different with it. So I'd love to see like his take on a horror genre film. Yeah, and I don't know what it would look like. I would imagine it would be like something, it would have, I think, similarities to like something like Psycho for Hitchcock, which brought together that noir feel with a horror, like a kind of psychological horror feel, kind of both in one. And so you already have the noir elements that kind of run through a lot of Nolan, and I would imagine if he were to make a more closer to like traditional horror genre film, it would be similar to something like Psycho, obviously with his own like, mood and own, touch on it. But yeah, I can't think of anything that like he hasn't done necessarily that like I would like to see him do. I can't really, but I also like don't have like how like all the genres on my mind. I don't know.
I think obviously he's like really well known for like. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say it might be fun to see him do like take on a documentary. I think he could make a really incredible documentary, depending on if he were to decide to do a documentary. I think it would be really good, is I guess what I'm saying. I don't know what
Yeah,
he would do a documentary on, but yeah.
I think he's obviously like really well known for being primarily a sci-fi director. You know, a lot of that involves like
Yeah,
action,
sci-fi action. Yeah.
suspense. You know, um, obviously he's done more like thriller, neo noir kind of stuff. You look at like Insomnia, Memento, and
Yep.
you know, then Oppenheimer being kind of primarily a drama. But
Drama
I
biopic.
definitely agree with you. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that I think a Christopher Nolan horror film would be really interesting. I would really love to see him do a monster movie. I think, you know, we could have, you know, a Jaws level film for a new generation if he did something like that. I don't think it's something you'd ever be interested in, but I'd also be interested to see his take on more of a fantastical, you know, genre. Like he's done
Okay.
sci-fi.
Yeah.
I'd love to see him do like a fantasy film. I think would be interesting. But
Like a fantasy
again,
adventure
with
sort of.
yeah, that could be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think just like maybe a proper, you know, like crime neo noir kind of vibe film too would be really interesting. And as far as like a franchise, I mean, Bond obviously would be incredible. I mean, Tenet basically was him making a James Bond movie
Right.
in a lot of
Right.
ways.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I mean, Star Wars comes to mind. Obviously, I think that's like the only big franchise he said that like it's not off the table. You know, I don't think they would ever offer him a
Yeah.
Star Wars movie because they probably,
I don't think so.
you know, because he, yeah, I don't know, but I don't know, man. I think he could probably. He's like the only person I think could probably revitalize the Terminator franchise. Maybe at this point, like I think he'd do really interesting things with that. But yeah, I don't know, man. That's something I like to think about sometimes. Is like what are some genres or some franchises that could use a little bit of that Christopher Nolan seasoning, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the reason Bond could work for him more than like Star Wars is because like the nature of Bond. Every time you get a new Bond, it's kind of like a reinvention in a sense. And
Yeah.
so like so with Star Wars you have so much already established within the franchise, and you see what happens when someone does something interesting and different with a Star Wars movie like Rian Johnson did, is everybody hates it. But I think it could really work with a Bond movie because it would be
true.
it's like every time there's a new Bond, it's a reboot. And so, you know, you don't know everyone plays it differently a little bit. There's elements that are obviously the same, but he could play with all of that. It would be a fun like playground for him.
Yeah,
So
he'd probably pull off. I think he'd probably be better for Star Trek over Star Wars. I think he could definitely pull that off for sure.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, not that I don't think he would make I think he would make a fine Star Wars film, but I don't. I think people would like be angry because he's doing something different with it, probably. Although, like, well, no, he has a similar mindset as far as like Rian Johnson likes turning genres on their heads, and Nolan really does too. And that's one of the reasons people
so much so that
hated The Last Jedi. Yeah.
Yeah, so much so that Rian Johnson made a whodunit that's not really a whodunit, and everyone's like, he reinvented the whodunit franchise, the whodunit like genre, and I'm like, but it's not actually a whodunit though. I still think the first Knives Out was a good movie. I didn't like the second one as much, but I'm just like, it's not really a whodunit, guys. So anyway, yeah. Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, I agree. The first one was great. Yeah, I think when I was like in college, maybe a year or two after, I might have said he was the GOAT. I think he's maybe right there with Spielberg is the blockbuster GOAT. They're kind of can you have co-GOATs?
Yeah.
Is that
you can have multiple?
So Spielberg, Nolan, co blockbuster GOATs. I think.
Oh, blockbuster goats. Okay, all right. I can agree to
That's
that.
yeah. All right. Yeah, so that's that was a fun way to kind of wrap up that section of the podcast, talking about Nolan, getting a good overview of his bio and career and yeah, I hope this the goal with this episode is obviously to kind of like, build a good foundation moving forward so that as we're watching through these films, we kind of have something to work from when we're thinking about them and talking about them. So yeah, hope that that was great for you, as a listener. And yeah, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll do a quick movie news section, and we will bring back the movie draft. It'll have been a couple of weeks since we've had a movie draft at this point. So after a couple of solo pods, and then I can't really draft against myself, and then a couple of weeks off. So I'm excited to get back into the movie drafting. So, but yeah, quick break, and we'll be right back. See you in a minute. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on the Establishing Shot today. We hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we hope you'll stick around for the segments we have coming up after this quick break. But during this break, I wanted to tell you how you can get more involved with the Establishing Shot podcast. There are several ways you can do this. The main way you can do it is by going to establishingshotpod.com, our website where you can find all sorts of information like episodes with the show notes on there, information about our guests for each episode. You can find reviews there, and there's a page where you can actually leave a review on the website if you want to. You can see all the platforms where the podcast is available, like Apple, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms, and even a link to our YouTube page where you can see a video version of the podcast. So please go to the website. And the place I want to highlight there is our donate page, which has information about our Establishing Shot family. This is a way that you can subscribe to the podcast to support all the efforts and the stuff that goes into making this podcast good and making it better than it even is now. We have different tiers that you can subscribe to, starting at $5. And what this will do is you'll be able to support the podcast, help me make it better, and also at the same time, you'll get early and ad-free episodes. You'll get access to our Discord server where you can join in and just kind of talking about movies with a community that loves film. And so we would love to have you in there. And then the higher up in the tiers you go, the more you get. Even things like chats and video chats that we'll do every once in a while where we get to talk about in more detail stuff that we're talking about on the podcast. So I hope you'll subscribe to that. Choose a tier that fits your budget, and I would love for you to support the podcast in that way. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is where you can find us on social media. You can find me personally on Twitter at @DEliPrice, and you can also follow me on Letterboxd. Letterboxd is kind of like a social media for movie reviews, so you can read my reviews there, and you can find me there at just Eli Price, no spaces or anything. So I'm on Twitter and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast on all the social platforms as well, such as Twitter at eShotPod, and then on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok at Establishing Shot Pod. So make sure to follow us so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments about the episode or about the podcast, you can always email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. And the very last thing I want to do before you get back into the episode today is just ask you to please go to Spotify and Apple and leave some ratings and reviews. That really helps the visibility of the podcast and gets it in more people's podcast feeds. And so we hope you will do that for us, and we would greatly appreciate it. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode, and I will see you next time on the Establishing Shot podcast. Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm Eli here with JP, and we are getting ready for some movie news. We're going to go a little light on the movie news this week and jump into the movie draft soon. So, but yeah, for movie news, there's not really like a whole lot interesting coming. September really is kind of like the movie dead zone in a way. Like you have all these like awesome
Creator
summer
comes out
movies.
in September.
Late September.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I'm very hyped for that movie.
Yeah. But you're coming off of like summer movies. You're not quite to like the fall push yet. That starts picking up in October. But yeah, Creator is going to give us a good, interesting end to September. So yeah, I don't worry. I'm interested in seeing what the Creator, how good that is too. So, but yeah, so
like Gareth Edwards
there's not a whole lot. Yeah, there's not a whole lot going on movie new release wise right now. There's been some that would have come out when this releases that have not come out at the time of the recording, so can't really speak to those, like Gran Turismo and that should be interesting. But
that movie actually surprisingly looks
I was
pretty
just interested.
good.
Well, it's Neil Blomkamp, and I really like his movies. So I'm interested in seeing what he does with it, at least.
Yeah, I've never understood understood the hate behind either Elysium or Chappie. I enjoy both of those movies just as much as District 9.
I feel the same. You know? Yeah, I think District 9 is the best, but I feel like those are like, it's not like they're like way lesser movies. I still really liked Elysium and Chappie.
No,
but people hated those movies. Whatever. But I'm also like a sucker for sci-fi. So like it doesn't have to be like fantastic for me to like it if it's sci-fi. So maybe that's what it is. But yeah, right. I was just gonna ask for this section, like, what are some movies that you've seen? Obviously, Oppenheimer. You said you've seen it twice, but yeah, other than that, what are some things that you've seen and really enjoyed? Maybe recent releases, but also like if there's just something that stands out, maybe a older film that you've seen recently.
Yeah. Well, I've been having to watch a lot of older movies just because I really haven't had them, movie going money. But I will say, I think the newest movie that I really enjoyed was They Cloned Tyrone, the Netflix film. Actually, had a really good time with that movie. I thought it was really funny, great plot, and the cast was great. And I will also say, as far as like a couple other recommendations, I watched a documentary about Hiroshima and Nagasaki called White Light, Black Rain. Wasn't like the... It's like, it's good because you get to hear the stories of like the victims of the bombings that survived firsthand, but it's not necessarily like the most like engaging documentary ever. It feels kind of very TV-esque, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Just hearing their stories. And then the only other movie I saw recently, I would say that I think I like was really good. It's an older film, and I saw it was one of the movies that inspired. It's one of the movies that Christopher Nolan actually had his crew watch on like the first day of doing The Dark Knight. It's called Black Sunday. It's from the 70s. It sounds very silly because it's like terrorists take over a blimp and like threaten to like drop lawn darts on a football game, and like it sounds very stupid, but it's actually like pretty intense, and like it's like they rig it with explosives, so it's not just dropping darts. It's like the darts will go out with some intensity. There's like 80,000 people in this in this stadium, and it just the building of the tension, especially like in the third act, as like the pilot gets a little more and more like mentally agitated. It actually was like a really riveting watch. So that was another one, first time watch that I found pretty good.
Oh, very, very cool. Well, yeah. Well, let's go ahead then and move on to the movie draft in a second. You know, if any of those movies sounded interesting to you, go check them out. You know, we can call that movie news section the JP has seen section. JP was here section of the show, and so you can go see those movies and see JP's name etched, you know, on the stall wall or the tree stump or whatever. He just watched these.
There you go.
Yeah, you can feel like you're watching them with JP. Yeah, and now you know how awkward I can make jokes sometime. Yeah, I would share some of my recent watches, but I really kind of shared that on the last show. If you're interested in that, I shared some of my my favorite recent releases on that last episode that came out a couple weeks ago at this point. And so yeah, go check that one out, and if you're interested in that. But yeah, let's do a movie draft. I was trying to think, man, what are we going to do for the Christopher Nolan overview? Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I didn't mean to cut. No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, get into it.
Yeah, I was just saying, you know, I was thinking like, man, Christopher Nolan, we've got to kick this thing off right for a movie draft. What are we going to do? A lot of times I'll try to work in something from the movie news, or a theme, or something from, you know, the Nolan movie, or the movie we're covering, but we're not covering a specific movie. And so I was just thinking like, well, what's something very Nolan? And right now, like, Nolan is all about the IMAX, and so so I looked into it, and I feel like there's enough movies, and so our movie draft is going to be movies not shown in IMAX, but actually filmed with IMAX cameras or IMAX certified cameras. So we're going to be drafting from those movies. We're going to draft 5 each, I think is a good number for this one, because there's not a lot of these. The list I've compiled is somewhere between 40 and 44. Some of them I'm not entirely like, for some reason on the Wikipedia page it has Fantasia 2000, but that's digital, so I don't. It was shown in IMAX, but the page wasn't about shown in IMAX. But it does have the like middle sections where like the celebrities are like introducing the shorts. So I don't know if those parts were shot in IMAX.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That'd be overkill for that, but sure.
I'm not going to draft it anyway. But
and I'm assuming we can't draft any Nolan films.
But yeah. Right. And so that's the other thing we're going to do. We're going to take Nolan films off the board, which really like takes off some of the best ones on this list, to be honest. But yeah, we're going to draft from this list. If you're interested in the list, I can put a link to the Letterboxd list I kind of made in the show notes, so that you can find it there. But yeah, I had added some more, but then took them back off again because I realized, so there's these, we can kind of talk a little bit about this. So there's IMAX cameras, which the only ones that are like true IMAX film are like I think they're like the 9802 or something like that, film cameras, and that's what Nolan likes to shoot with. And others have shot with those too. There's not actually any narrative feature films that are shot completely on IMAX film. like the 70 millimeter IMAX celluloid. Nolan, I think Dunkirk is the one that has the highest percentage. It's like 75% is shot in IMAX 70 millimeter. And Dunkirk, Oppenheimer might be more. We don't really, that sort of stuff hasn't come out yet, but I do know that it's not completely an IMAX film. But it would be hard to beat the 75% that Dunkirk has with a 3-hour movie.
Right.
We'll I'm sure we'll find out eventually. But yeah, we're not drafting Nolan films anyway. Since we're in our Nolan series, we're going to take those off the board as per usual. And so, yeah, the Nolan, you got the Nolan films. He uses the film, but there's also digital cameras that are IMAX certified. So these are cameras that IMAX has basically put the stamp on that says if you shoot in these, we're certifying this as the digital. You can probably speak better about this than I can because I don't have a lot of camera knowledge, but basically I guess like the dumb camera guy terms would be like the digital camera picks up both like the aspect ratio and the amount of, I guess, just like clarity that the IMAX needs to be able to like be converted into an IMAX format. So there's not a lot of these sorts of cameras. But I did find out, so I had added some and took them back off because there's cameras like the Arri Alexa LF and the Arri Alexa Mini LF are IMAX certified cameras, but you can have those cameras that aren't IMAX. So like the best way I could find to figure this out is to go on the IMDb page for a film, and if you scroll like to the bottom of the information, there's the technical specs, and you can see exactly like what cameras were used there on IMDb, which is pretty helpful if you are interested in that sort of thing. But you can see like, so some movies will say like, for instance, it'll say like Arri Alexa LF, but then one that's IMAX will say Arri Alexa LF IMAX. And so I don't know like exactly what differences there are in those cameras, but I took those off that don't have the IMAX next to it because I was like, oh, I guess these aren't actually IMAX qualified or certified because they don't have that IMAX stamp on them. But yeah, really, it's probably like, this is probably like really boring to some people and really interesting to other people. And so like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move on because honestly, I don't know what I'm talking about other than the tiny amount of research that I did on this to figure out what movies I could put on this list for us to draft. I don't know if you wanted to say anything at all about that.
I mean, yeah, the only thing is, I think you're delayed right now, so I think that's what's happening.
I think we're both delayed for each other. Yeah.
Let's just get into the draft. I don't have anything else to say.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, we're gonna jump into this draft. Again, Nolan films off the table. You can see the list in the show notes if you're interested in seeing all the films. There's not a lot, like I said, right around 40. So yeah, we're gonna draft 5 each. I believe last time we were on together, I drafted first, so I'm gonna give you the first pick for this one. So yeah, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take your first pick.
All right, I'm trying to hedge my bets here safely. I'm coming for the win this time. I think my first pick is gonna have to be Dune Part 1 from 2021. I mean, phenomenal film. I'm so excited for Part 2, and just absolutely gorgeous. I think Denis Villeneuve does such a good job of creating a sense of scale for like the massive ships and the sandworms, and I think the IMAX cameras really help capture that. So that'll be my first draft pick is Dune Part 1.
Yeah, I yeah, I mean it's really like the visuals of it were my favorite part, honestly, of the whole movie. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it it is a really good film. It's probably the best. I've always said it's since I saw it, like it's probably the best adaptation you could make of an unadaptable book. Which
Yeah.
didn't kind of feel. I read it and it's like it's pretty unadaptable. But it's probably the best you could possibly do with it. So yeah, I feel like that's a good pick. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could go here, and I don't really know where exactly I'm gonna land. Um, there's films I probably like more that are probably not gonna win me the votes that I might try to wait for later. Um, but the highest rated movie I have on here, that I'm not saving for later, that is also not a Nolan film. I think I'm going to go ahead and draft it. I absolutely loved it. Nope. You kind of mentioned it earlier in the podcast. Jordan Peele's Nope. Um, yeah, just an incredible movie. It like to me, it felt like him. To me, Nope felt like Jordan Peele saying, I can make a Spielberg movie just as good as Spielberg can." And like to me, like if that's what he was saying with it, then I feel like he's right. Because I loved it. It was a great movie, a great like summer blockbuster, kind of like sci-fi thriller kind of movie. Yeah, and it was shot with actual, like, not digital, but there were it's shot partly digital, partly film, and then partly IMAX film. So it was actually like the 9802 IMAX film camera that some of the scenes were shot with. And a lot of these, so none of these are like fully shot in IMAX film. Some of them are fully shot in IMAX digital, but none in fully in film. So a lot of these you're getting like partial IMAX shots. But yeah, if we did only fully, then we would have a very small list. So
One
but
pick
yeah, Nope.
each.
That's
Yeah,
my first
Nope.
pick.
Yeah, Nope was great. I think it also really revolutionized some of the technology with like the night for day stuff they did, and they used like IR cameras to record light, and
Yeah.
just really really crazy what they did with it. But all right, so my my number 2 pick is going to be a pretty recent film that I love. We may have discussed it earlier, but I think we're going to have to go with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I loved this movie. I laughed.
Okay.
I cried. And I think I don't think James Gunn could have exited from Marvel any better. I don't understand why a lot of people are just like really hating on him and thinking that he's going to ruin what he's doing with DC. I'm nervous, but I'm also like, y'all are acting like he hasn't given us some of the best superhero movies we've ever gotten, with the Guardians trilogy and
Yeah.
the Suicide Squad also being phenomenal. So I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3,
Yeah.
phenomenal movie. That's my number 2.
Yeah. It's not like, I mean, it's not like things are going to get worse for DC at this point. Like it's either the same or better. So, yeah, which I still haven't gotten around to seeing the Flash. I definitely will, because the Flash is one of my favorite comic book characters. So I just haven't gotten around to seeing the movie yet. But yeah, I didn't love Guardians 3. I don't really care to get into it right here in the middle of the draft, but it's one of those things that's like, I'm glad like some people loved it, but it just wasn't my favorite. But yeah, this isn't the best list for me, because there's just not like a lot of movies that I really love. Yeah, there are a lot of big blockbusters on this list, and which is fine, because there are but like 3 of probably the top 4 or 5 are Nolan films for me, and I can't draft those. So yeah, I think number 2 here. I'm gonna go with. Okay, well, you went with your superhero movie. I'll go with my superhero, and you just actually mentioned it. I'm gonna go with a much better James Gunn movie, in my opinion, in The Suicide Squad. Um, I loved The Suicide Squad. I thought it was funny and interesting, and like kind of the opposite of, not the opposite, but like took all the bad things about the original take on the Suicide Squad, and like just like vastly improved upon every single bit of it. So, yeah, that I've got to take a superhero movie because you're bound to at some point with this list, and I think that's my favorite one on the list. Well, other than The Dark Knight, obviously, but yeah.
Gonna be honest, I did not even see that was on this list. Otherwise, I probably would have picked it. But that's fine. Yeah, I actually don't like hate the first Suicide Squad movie. I think it's still pretty fun. But I don't know. I saw some headlines recently that David Ayer said that James Gunn said that his like Ayer cut like should have its time to shine, which I still want to see because I've heard it's obviously like a much better version of the movie. But that's neither here nor there. I think for my number 3, I got to go with one of my favorite film franchises of all time. I've seen every single movie, the good, the bad, the ugly. I got to go with No Time to Die. I loved this movie. I thought it was a brilliant send-off for Daniel Craig's run as Bond, who's kind of been my favorite. I mean, also, I grew up watching him as Bond. And yeah, I mean, I really his trilogy, like his sequences of films had like a lot of ups and downs. I mean, you have like Casino Royale and Skyfall are great. I don't hate Quantum of Solace. It's okay. Spectre, extremely disappointing as a follow-up to Skyfall. So just for No Time to Die to then come out, I mean, just what a great, one of the best Bond movies ever made. I think the only really weak thing is the villain with Rami Malek. He's not like the most formidable, but it's a beautiful looking movie.
I didn't love him,
great story. Hans Zimmer's score is great. Probably the best music in any James Bond movie. But yeah, so that's going to be my number 3 is No Time to Die.
Yeah. I enjoyed No Time to Die. I thought, in my opinion, I think like I think Casino Royale and Skyfall are just like, I mean, tiers above
oh, for sure,
the rest of the movies in the Craig franchise. But yeah, I didn't hate No Time to Die. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was a good movie, with some flaws that made it not nearly as good to me. Rami Malek's villain, like you said, was a big part of that. I like Rami Malek, but I don't know what they were doing with him in that movie. But yeah, so I know there's one movie I can save for my last pick. That's probably my favorite movie on the entire list. So I'm going to keep saving that. And I'm going to do, okay, I'm going to do this, and it's definitely like a pandering to the crowd pick. It's not my favorite, between the two options. I'm going to pick Star Wars The Force Awakens. So I remember, and here's the reason why. I like The Last Jedi more than The Force Awakens. I think personally The Last Jedi is the best Star Wars movie since the original trilogy. I know that some people hate it. Whatever. It was a really good movie. The Force Awakens, though, the reason I'm picking it for this, I have a reason that's not just pandering to the crowd that might like Force Awakens more, and it's this. It's because me and my wife decided when these movies started, when they announced these, we were like, let's go see these in IMAX 3D when they come out every couple of years. And so we did. We, for all three of the new trilogy, we went and saw them in IMAX 3D. And so the experience of going on opening night to The Force Awakens after, years and years with no new Star Wars, it was just like a really cool experience. Obviously you have Jedis in the lobby, people dressed up, and the theater was packed. Not just like, I feel like the whole theater, every screen was probably showing it. And it was just a really fun, memorable experience that me and my wife kind of got to share going to see. And we went and saw it in IMAX 3D. It was the first time it wasn't the first time I'd seen IMAX, but the first time I saw IMAX 3D, which is very different than like the real 3D experience. And so, yeah, I'm picking that for that memory reason. And I do like The Force Awakens. I think it's a really fun sort of twisted, a little bit of a twist remake of, the original Star Wars. Yeah, Force Awakens.
Oh boy, there's some movies on this list I don't know why they shot them on IMAX cameras, but all right. Man,
I feel the same way.
There's like some movies I'm like, that movie was not worth the money that it costs to shoot stuff on IMAX. But man, I think for my number 4, I really feel like I gotta go with a movie that I think is still very, very misunderstood, but a movie that I really love. And we talked earlier about Nolan and his philosophical, mumbling, so to speak. And I think this is a movie that's very philosophical in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to go with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I think it's a movie that is very misunderstood. I think it's maybe a borderline masterpiece. Like, especially when you watch the ultimate version, like the director's cut, so to speak. Man, I think DC just did Zack Snyder so dirty, where they hire him to like shape their DC EU and then don't trust him to like really make the movie that he wanted to make. And yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think it definitely has its issues where, the introduction of the full Justice League feels a little forced. I don't 100% love like the big ending with Doomsday, but I do like some of the moments that occur in that movie. But the actual like philosophical conversation where Bruce Wayne is asking himself, like, this guy is basically a god, like, who's there to stop him if he has a bad day, essentially. Like, it's I don't know, I just found it really fascinating movie. It's one that I like to rewatch on occasion, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I wonder if, Marvel is its own thing as far as superhero movies go and what they've done. But I almost wonder if Christopher Nolan kind of ruined DC characters by making such an amazing trilogy of Batman films, because this is a very comic book movie. Like, and so like, but people like have such strong memory of what Nolan did with Batman that I almost wonder if like you can't really make a very comic booky Batman movie anymore. He always has to be like dark and gritty, and you can't have like fun, like campy, corny dialogue anymore. Which that's kind of part of comic book language, is the campiness and kind of the corny lines. Like the whole like Your Mom Was Named the Same as My Mom. Like, yeah, it's really corny,
Oh my!
but it's also like
it's
kind
not
of fun
corny.
and like, yeah, I mean it is, but that's okay. Like that's the thing. Like that's something can be corny and still be like fun and enjoyable. Like those aren't like mutually exclusive. Like that's part of the fun of it is like the kind of corniness of it.
I don't appreciate your usage of the phrase corny.
Or that's fine. If you don't think it's corny, that's fine. This is a subjective opinion, but yeah, I still like Batman v Superman. Like I said, it's very comic booky. And people that like have read comic books kind of probably understand what I'm saying when I say that. But yeah, I don't think that's a bad pick. But yeah, people don't like that movie. They really don't. Okay, I'm gonna go with so I have I don't know. So this is not my favorite movie of this franchise. I feel like story-wise it's one of the weaker ones. But as far as like utilizing an IMAX format like to the max, like does an incredible job. I'm gonna go with Ghost Protocol, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. The Burj Khalifa sequence where he's like hanging off the tallest building in the world, climbing up with like these I don't even know what they are. They're like some sort of crazy technology,
like sonic gloves.
Not suction cups. Yeah, sonic gloves. I think that's what they call them. Yeah, really. I mean, that's such an incredible stunt and sequence. And yeah, that Mission Impossible, the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible franchise is like made for like that's the sort of movie that's made for IMAX. And it is kind of a shame that it didn't get a long run in IMAX because of Oppenheimer. But yeah, it is the new one rather. But yeah, this one, I'm gonna go ahead and pick Ghost Protocol. I like the movie. The stunts are great. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a real bungle.
Where are you going with your last pick?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say it's a real bungle on the studio for releasing Dead Reckoning Part 1 so close to Barbenheimer. You know, I don't know. They'll probably be talking about that one for a while, but yeah. So my last pick, if my particular favorite Transformers movie was on this list, I'm surprised it's not. I would have picked that, but being the Transformers options that are here, I can't pick any of them because they're not the good ones. But I do think Michael Bay utilizes the IMAX camera like really well in some of the Transformers action sequences. But
yeah, sure.
From the movies on the list, since the best Transformers movie, which is Dark of the Moon, is not here, I think for number 5, I'm gonna have to go with Star Trek Into Darkness. I really liked a lot of what J.J. Abrams did with like the kind of revival of Star Trek. Just so people know, I grew up in a household where my dad liked Star Wars, my mom liked Star Trek, so I grew up watching both, and I've always appreciated both for different things. I like Star Trek's always like obviously been a lot more like hard science fiction, much more cerebral. You know, the complaint is that J.J. Abrams kind of turned Star Trek into Star Wars, which I get that. They are like very high octane, except for like the most recent one, which I think, you know, kind of had a good kind of throwback. But minus the whole, you know, Benedict Cumberbatch being the character Khan from the movie thing, I don't really know how I feel about that. But other than that, I think I remember. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember really enjoying it. And you know, the Star Trek universe is a universe with massive spaceships and stuff, and I think the IMAX format really helps with that. Especially, I think the ending of that movie where they're like fighting like on the hull of the ship as it's like crashing, like really helps give you that sense of scale which is what IMAX is so good for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to think. So yeah, going back to Transformers, there are not good Transformers movies on this list. For absolutely, totally agree. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. So sorry, I'm kind of lost. I'm gonna have to edit this part out. Yeah, my mind I'm like looking at the list and like my mind got caught like on other movies and like got lost on all these movie posters. But yeah,
I
I'll
love the
jump back
random
in right here.
Chinese movies on this list.
Yeah, they're great. But yeah, Into Darkness. I feel like I like the other two more. So there was the original that Abrams did, and then he did this one, and then I think it was Justin Lin did Star Trek Beyond, and I think I liked Beyond a little bit more than Into Darkness. But I don't have like strong memories of these movies. Like I remember kind of what happens in them, but I haven't really revisited them since I originally saw them. But yeah, I think Abrams did fine with them. It's as far as like franchise IP filmmaking goes, like it's fine. It's fun time. It's enjoyable. And it has a little bit of depth and emotion to it, which is always good. Yeah, I think Into Darkness is a fine pick. My last pick is a movie that I based on context clues from earlier in the episode, I knew you hadn't seen, so I knew I could save it for last. But it's my favorite movie on this list, and it's actually one of my like favorite movies of all time. I think it's one of the best movies like just ever made, both like subjectively and you could probably argue objectively too. And it's actually another, just before I say the pick, it actually was shot certain sequences in IMAX film, but it was actually never shown in IMAX, which is a shame. I think, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like they need to do a re-release of it and show it in IMAX, and I would try to go see it. My final pick is going to be Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life. When I saw this for the first time, I was just like entranced by it, and kind of, it's a movie that I kind of like, it ended and I was just thinking about it, and I trying to figure out what to do with what I just saw. It's just an incredibly beautiful film. And Malick, like I kind of mentioned this earlier in the episode, but Malick is a director I would describe more as like a poetry director than a prose director, meaning that like narrative is like not that interesting to him. He's more interested in like showing you things. He uses a lot of like voiceover and visual montage and like just these incredibly like beautiful shots. It speaks more as like visual poetry than visual prose. And so like if you approach it looking for like a strong narrative and story, you're probably going to hate it because it's just not there. That's probably why like The Thin Red Line didn't work for you the first time. But yeah, The Tree of Life is just an incredible film about, I don't know, it's about a lot of things, but it's about creation and humanity, the flaws of humanity, but also the grace that humanity is capable of. the relationship of humanity to space and time, but yet the transcendence of humanity, of space and time. There, but again, all of this is shown in a very like poetic way, not necessarily like spelled out for you narratively. And so like, I don't know, the experience of watching the Tree of Life, you have to be in the right kind of mindset to watch something like that. But yeah, it's an incredible film. So very happy to have it on my team, but it's also one that I know not a lot of people have seen. So isn't really going to help me necessarily in the voting, but hopefully if you're listening and you've never seen this, hopefully you'll go seek it out, and with kind of my explanation in mind, so that hopefully that'll help enhance your viewing of it. I just think it's one of the best films ever made, personally.
Yeah, I even love to revisit Thin Red Line just because I was like I was like at high school when I tried to watch it. So the JP now might appreciate it a lot more than JP then. But yeah, I've heard a lot about Tree of Life, and I definitely would love to get around to seeing it one of these days for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you've even got like really incredible performances by the two kind of main people. Main characters are played by Brad Pitt and Jessica Chastain. And you kind of have these other scenes with Sean Penn cut in. And so, they're putting on really incredible performances in a very different way than, those actors would typically, you would think of like a great Brad Pitt or a great Jessica Chastain performance. It's very different from that, but still really incredible. So yeah, it's just, I could go on and on about it makes me want to go watch it right now, but I'll probably need to go to bed instead. But yeah, I'll stop fawning over the Tree of Life, and I'll go ahead and read off our final results from our IMAX shot in IMAX movie draft. JP ended with Dune Part 1, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, No Time to Die, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Star Trek Into Darkness. A lot of fun movies there. I finished with Nope. Nope the movie, not Nope as in I didn't take anything. Nope the movie, The Suicide Squad, Star Wars Episode 7. That's right. Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, and The Tree of Life. That was a fun draft. I wish there were more like really good movies to choose from, but I'm sure there's some fun things in there.
Yeah, I'm sure the draft you'll do throughout this series will be pretty intense, depending on the categories.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, there was even like a few, we kind of mentioned it. There's like off camera or whatever. We mentioned, there's like a few Chinese movies in here that's like really funny to see in this, in this list. That like, I have like no intention of ever seeing.
I love
they're
watching,
probably fine and fun films, but I love watching Chinese cinema. I love watching Chinese cinema, but I don't know, these just don't seem the sort that I would seek out necessarily. They're all like, 3 of them at least are like Chinese war films, which that might be interesting. But yeah. But yeah, that's our movie draft section. Do you have any recommendations of the week for us?
Other than making sure everybody goes outside and gets plenty of exercise and sun, while we still can before the summer's up. I did have one movie recommendation that I watched recently that like I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, not because it's a great movie, but just because
Mm-hmm.
the performances are absolutely ridiculous. It stars Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones. And I don't know what's worse, Tommy Lee Jones doing an Irish accent, but he still sounds like Tommy Lee Jones, or Jeff Bridges doing a sometimes Irish accent, but also like a Boston accent. But it's 1994's Blown Away, where they're
Okay.
both like old friends, former. Basically, Tommy Lee Jones is like a terrorist. He's like so bad, even the IRA didn't want him. Jeff Bridges is like his old friend, and there was like this botched situation. Tommy Lee Jones goes to jail, and he ends up breaking out and finding out that Jeff Bridges' character is on the bomb squad in Boston, and decides to to play a game with him, so to speak. I will say there were some sequences in this movie that I
Nice.
thought were actually really, really good at building tension. There's like this one scene where Tommy Lee Jones' character can make a bomb out of anything. He's been inside this one, the home of these characters, and they come home not knowing, and they like start messing with like the fridge and the oven and this and that, and it's like this whole little like 15-minute segment where you're like waiting for any of these things to blow up, and that was a really effective scene. But yeah, definitely not like a great movie, but pop some popcorn and have some fun with a little bit of ridiculousness.
Yeah. Yeah. I like a good fun movie every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's even more fun. Like I rewatched through the whole like Mission Impossible franchise, getting ready for Dead Reckoning Part 1 recently. And it's just really great when you can have like a combination of really fun action packed movies, but also really good, like really well made too. And so I like that. Yeah, fun recommendation. I'm gonna recommend some kind of like source material that I'll be using throughout this series for my research, just in case anyone wants to join in on the research with me. But I'm using two books for different reasons. One of them is it has more of like a coffee table book kind of feel to it, but also pretty packed with information. It's called Christopher Nolan, the iconic filmmaker and his work, by Ian Nathan. It's kind of it's almost like an annotated version of the other book I'm going to recommend, with a lot of kind of coffee table style like pictures and movie posters and stuff like that all throughout. But and you can probably hear me flipping through it on the mic. Um, but yeah, it's a really pretty well put together book. It looks nice, and also has like a lot of great like about the movie. Like it goes kind of movie by movie through his career. Um, and then the other one is a more dense uh, book that I'm going to be kind of trying to read through alongside the series. It's called The Nolan Variations: The Movies, Mysteries, and Marvels of Christopher Nolan, by Tom Shawn. That's his last name is Shone, but I think you pronounce it Sean. Sean. I don't know. Tom Shawn, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, it's a very dense book. He kind of made this book alongside a lot of interviews with Nolan, and so really like Nolan feels like he's kind of a part of the book in a way, in a way that typically like books like this don't feel like, but because there's so much like interview material, it feels like Nolan is just as much like a writer of this book as the actual author. Um, but yeah, so far it's really good. I've read the introduction and about half of the first chapter, and he does kind of go in a way chronologically through Nolan's work, but it's in a very like different way than the other book. It's not as like cut and dry, now we're talking about this film sort of thing. But yeah, it's really good. It's very dense, a ton of information about Nolan and his work in there, that a lot of the material that I talked about today really comes from that book. And but yeah, those are my two recommendations: the Tom Schoen and the Ian Nathan books on Christopher Nolan. Yeah, if you want to read through those along with me as we go through the series, that would be awesome. If you are going to do that, reach out to me and let me know. Wherever you follow on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you follow, let me know. I'd love to know if anyone's taking on that endeavor with me. But yeah, that's really it. That's our recommendations. The IMAX movie draft was really fun. And man, I had a great time talking about Nolan and getting ready for this series. So yeah, thanks, JP. A lot of fun.
No problem. Anytime. I mean, yeah, I love nerding out about really, films in general, but especially when it's a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan. There's just so much to talk about. I'm excited to listen along to the coming episodes and kind of hearing a little bit more about the how the sausage is made, so to speak, with some of these films.
For sure. Yeah. That's it for this episode. Next week we will be covering Following, Christopher Nolan's first film. And so, yeah, I look forward to that. But until then, I've been Eli Price for JP. This has been The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us on The Establishing Shot today. We hope you enjoyed the episode and got a lot out of it. Make sure before you go to like and subscribe on all your podcast platforms, and especially on Spotify and Apple. If you could leave a rating and review, that would greatly help the visibility of the podcast, and I would greatly appreciate it. Again, if you go to establishingshotpod.com, you can find out all you need to know about the show, where to find us on the social media platforms, where to find us podcast-wise, YouTube, and you can even leave a voicemail there on the website on the right side of your screen. So click that if you want to give a comment or ask a question about the show. Just feel free to leave a voicemail. We'd be happy to feature that on the show. And also, if you just want to email rather than leave a voicemail, you can email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com, and we would be happy to answer your question there or feature a question or comment on the show if it pertains to the episodes. So please do that, and we would love for you to join the Establishing Shot family. You can, again, find where to do that on the donate page at establishingshotpod.com. We hope you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.